Okay, well, welcome back. This is the second day of the second CILE Winter School. We're very pleased to have you back. We have an excellent lineup of topics, 3 topics for today. Just a couple of reminders. Can all the participants or speakers please keep their audio and visual muted unless you are speaking? And after you've spoken, please make sure to turn off your audio and visual. Also, I want to thank our IT person, Hamdoun, who has been with us this whole time. I'm sorry, I knew I would forget somebody yesterday, but Hamdoun has always been extremely helpful and efficient in helping us with these the technology of these online schools. Also, for the speakers, for the 3 speakers, can you please make sure to use the application, the share application, when you upload your PowerPoint. I think that they're the main reminders for today. And without further ado, let me introduce the first session with Dr. Mohammed Ghali, who is the Professor of Biomedical Ethics at CILE and our Academic Director. And the title of his presentation is Maṣlaḥa and Related Concepts in Contemporary Islamic Bioethical Discourse. And Dr. Ghali is famous throughout the world for his work in this field. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ray, and thanks for all colleagues who are behind this event. I appreciate the great work done by all of you, and I'm very happy to be with you here for this session on Maṣlaḥa and related concepts in the Islamic bioethical discourse. So I will speak about Maṣlaḥa, I suppose, and I hope that you already have an idea now about this term, which literally means good, something good. If we added some descriptive words to it, like common, good, public benefit, etc. So we speak about achieving the good for the people. When it comes to the medicine, of course, we speak about achieving this good for the patients and people who are in need of medical service or healthcare facilities. And also the important related concept here is the harm, darar, or mafsada. And that's why one of the key aspects of bioethical reasoning is the so-called harm-benefit assessment or benefit-risk assessment. So it's all about weighing over the expected benefits and harms of medical intervention. Next slide, please. We will, this is the outline of my talk today. We will start by overall framing, speaking about some methodological issues, in which we talk about the symmetries of religion and medicine, these similarities between religion and medicine, that both of them have been sent by God to the humans for maximizing their benefit and minimizing their harms or losses. And then we speak about the question, who determines what maslaha is in this context, in the context of bioethical discussions or medical ethics. And then the second part, we speak about applied examples. Many of you asked about examples, concrete examples last time, so we will have discussions about this. And by the end, we will speak about concluding remarks. In the applied examples, I made a typology because we cannot go through every single example. This is an endless task. We made a typology based on what you heard from colleagues yesterday, including Dr. Mu'taz al-Khatib, that maslaha, or this good or this benefit, can sometimes be recognized, other times unrecognized. The recognized, as we call it, maslaha mu'tabara in Arabic, unrecognized maslaha mulgha, And then we have Al-Maṣlaḥa Al-Mursala, the unrestricted or unspecified. Here I made it borderline or controversial cases. This unrestricted led to a certain controversy among the religious scholars and disagreements about how to judge specific medical interventions. And then we end by concluding remarks. So now we will go to the overall framing. Next slide, please. Next one. In the overall framing, there is a very important book that can be used as a starting point for our discussions. The book is called قواعد الأحكام في مصالح الأنام. The book is written by a 13th century scholar, Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam. And as you see from the title, مصالح الأنام, مصالح is the plural of maslaha, the good things or the benefits or the interests of humans. And then he tries to develop a coherent system, قواعد الأحكام, in order to realize what these masalih are, who determines them, how to know them, etc. So as we see here in the next slide, one of the very first chapters in his book, next slide, please. One of the very first chapters in his book is called this فصل فيما تعرف به المصالح والمفاسد وفي تفاوتهما. So the chapter is about how to know what benefit is, what harm is, and the different ranks within each of them. Maslaha is not one single block, harm is not one single block, there are differences, hierarchies between them. And here he makes this symmetries between medicine and religion. He speaks about two important similarities. The first of them is that the source is the same. So we come to know religion through God, who revealed scripture to the humans. And we come also to know medicine also through God. As he says here, وَالَّذِي وَضَعَ الشَّرْعَ هُوَ الَّذِي وَضَعَ الطِّبَّ. The one who created, the one who made, the one who developed, the one who sent down, the one who revealed Sharia, religion, is the one who also sent us the medicine. So it has a divine origin. So this is the first similarity between religion and medicine. The second similarity, if you move further, the second similarity is about, and again, one more. Both of them have been sent down by God or made or created by God to achieve two things, which we call them in bioethics, beneficence and non-maleficence. Achieving benefit for people and avoiding harm that may happen to them. He said these are the two objectives of both Tibb and Shara, both of them. This symmetry or this similarity between medicine and Sharia created, and this is the third point, the next point, is the nobility of medicine. Noble al-Tibb. The nobility of medicine has been recognized almost throughout Islamic history. We hardly find anyone who would say that medicine is not a good science or a bad science or doesn't have good aims or good objectives or stuff like this. If you move to the next. This nobility of medicine is resulting from the joint source, that they are both coming from God, so they have a divine origin, and they share common objectives, mainly beneficence, non-maleficence, as we call them in our modern time. That's why some religious scholars spoke directly that learning medicine is a collective duty. So there must be someone or some people in the community who know medicine and they are enough to treat the diseases and ailments of the people and to take care of their health condition. If this is not done, then we have a religious sin, not just a civil problem, but a religious sin. So this means that Tibb here by itself, in itself, is a maslaha. is not only revealing a maslaha, it is in itself a maslaha. It's a common good for the community and, of course, for individuals. Next, please. Yes, you can go ahead. Yes, that's it. Yeah. So the medicine was clearly linked to the 5 higher objectives of Sharia. As you heard yesterday, these 5 are called objectives when we speak about God. That what are the objectives of God as a lawgiver with an uppercase L, ما مقاصد الشارع, to protect 5 things or to preserve 5 things. From the perspective of humans, these are our masalih, these are our benefits, this is our best interest, these big 5. So very easily linked to preserving life. That's why medicine is there, to protect people's life, to improve their health condition, to treat their diseases, etc. So it's very much linked to preserving life. Also very easily linked to protecting, preserving, and maintaining human intellect. If we read especially the classical works on this, we find this we call it overlap between what is physical and what's psychological. So mental health and psychological health and taking care of the psyche and nafs, not just the body, al-jasad, was part of the writings on medicine. Al-Balkhi wrote on masalih al-anfus wal-abdan. The masalih, the benefits, the interests related to body and related to the psyche, the spirit or the soul. Masalih al-anfusi wal-abdan. So they were quite interlinked. Also protecting offspring, zuriya, to help people, for instance, to get children, treating infertility, etc. So it's not only life and intellect, which is very easy, that medicine is instrumental to achieve these masalih or these benefits, but also the other 3, like offspring. Yes, go ahead. And the discussions on property also, حفظ المال, was a big discussion about this, like for instance, the medical fees and treating the poor, people who cannot afford these medical fees, how to deal with that. And of course, also preserving one's health is a very important tool to work and get money and earn your livelihood. If you are sick, you are very unlikely, you will be very unlikely able to take care of yourself and people surrounding you. And even religion. This is the next one, please. Protecting and preserving religion, medicine played a very important role in that, because medicine was not only seen in the Islamic tradition as a profession that helps people take care of their health, but also to have a coherent and consistent system for religious rulings, ضبط الأحكام الشرعية. Many of the religious rulings are depending on a certain level of medical knowledge. And that's why it was common in the pre-modern time that this kind of interdisciplinarity, that you will have physicians who will write about fiqh, or will be categorized as physicians, like Averroes, Ibn Rushd in the Maliki school, Ibn al-Nafis in the Shafi'i school. You will see these physicians in the biographies of jurists in these schools. And also many religious scholars who had relatively good knowledge, good medical knowledge. We have good evidence that they read medical works, they understood them. People like Al-Qarafi, like Ibn al-Qayyim. I wrote some articles about this issue, medical knowledge of these jurists about embryology, for instance, etc. So to protect and preserve one's religion, you need some medical knowledge as a jurist or as a religious scholar. So here the link between masalih and medicine is more than self-evident throughout the history of the Islamic tradition. Now we move to the next one, and that's why we said that it's a collective duty, because in order to achieve all these masalih, these benefits or interest or good things, you cannot do that without having medicine in hand and good medical profession in hand. Now, who decides that this, for instance, is good for achieving this maslaha, this benefit, or averting this harm? Who decides? Usually, next please, you need to, it's not one side work, it's like a puzzle, and you need more than one piece to come to the conclusion by judging this as maslaha, as harm or benefit. You need medical knowledge, modern time, biomedical knowledge, and religious knowledge, religious sciences. You try to bring harmony between the both. Of course, realizing that both are coming from God, it was clear in the mindset, let's say, mainstream religious discourse, that it's impossible to find inherent incoherence between the two, because it's God who revealed both types of knowledge to us, whether through the scripture, the divine scripture, or through the what they call it, the laws in the nature, العادات التي أجراها الله في الكون, or the laws, القوانين والسنن. So they must be together. They must be together. So when you have certain medical knowledge, it must be in harmony with the religious knowledge, and vice versa. So they needed both. And sometimes religious scholars had to link their religious judgment to medical knowledge. For instance, using the water, the very classical example, using water heated by the sun, الماء المشمس. A big debate among jurists whether it's good to use it, is it bad, or etc., because of its possible harm to the skin, for instance, and that it can cause leprosy and stuff like this. And most of the time they would say this is up to the physicians. When the physicians decide it's not good for this person or that person because his or her skin is allergic to this type of water, then it is not good for the person to do it, etc. Even I have seen an important example given by Al-Shatibi, a 14th century scholar who wrote a lot about maqasid and masalih, about objectives and benefits. In his book Al-Muwafaqat, he spoke about the example of honey. And that honey is mentioned in the Quran as a sort of treatment, shifa. It's healing for the diseases. And he said this is in general, but when we know from physicians that it can be harmful for some people in certain cases, we have also to keep this in mind. And he said clearly, in order to judge something, you need these two aspects of knowledge, one coming from the medical and one coming from the religious, and you try to create harmony between the two. If we go to the next, in the modern time, it became clear. Yes, next. That yes, please go on. Yes, thank you. So in the modern time, the questions about, not here about water heated by the sun or honey and its medical benefits or harms for the people, but it's about much more complex questions like cloning, like stem cell research, organ transplantation, etc. And we don't have this interdisciplinary figures like Averroes and Al-Qayyim. We don't have this caliber of the people. So this led to having more than one person on the table, which we call collective ijtihad. So the reasoning about these issues will take a collective form by having more than one religious scholar and more than one biomedical scientist on physician on the table to come to a collective advice or to a collective fatwa. Yes, please, next. Since the 1980s, we have three institutions that adopted this collective, the mechanism of collective ijtihad. One quite the most influential organization in this regard that holds conferences and symposia only on bioethical issues from an Islamic perspective. That's the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences. And this organization collaborates with the Islamic Fiqh Academy in Mecca and International Islamic Fiqh Academy in Jeddah. So deciding what's beneficial and what's harmful now is not anymore in the hand of the religious scholar or the class of religious scholars only. They accept it, and it is now institutionalized, this form, accepted having non-specialists in religious sciences, in this case, the biomedical scientists, having them on the table and discussing with them about these issues. Next, please. And I wrote an article about this for those who need more details or information about this. This is an article that I published in 2015 about this shared authority, about deciding what's good, what's not, within the context of healthcare and bioethical issues. Next, please. So these are the overall framing. Now the applied cases. The applied cases, when we have an panoramic overview of the issues and try to look at them through the lens of maslaha / mafsada, benefit / harm, we see that we can identify three big categories. Some of the benefits revealed by medicine or stressed and underscored by medical sciences were recognized as maslaha mu'tabara. Why? And this is the great majority of the topics. Why? Because what we mentioned in the overall framing. Because medicine itself is maslaha. Medicine itself is something created by God, like the religion, revealed to the human's intellects through God. It's instrumental for achieving the big five benefits: protecting life, property, intellect, religion, offspring, etc. So, in principle, all what comes from medicine will be something good, unless there is a reason to think otherwise. So all the types of medicine that we have now, like preventive medicine, طب الوقائي, through which we try to avoid the onset of an illness, we try to avoid getting sick, accepted, like maintaining a promoting lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, what to eat, what not to eat. The religious scholars would always say, if it is proved by scientists that this or that type of food is harmful to your body, then you shouldn't do that. There is no maslaha in that, etc. Curative medicine, having drugs to treat diseases, medical interventions, even if these medical interventions would entail sometimes harm or even serious harm. Classical example, amputating gangrenous organ, whose amputation is necessary to preserve someone's life because it got completely corrupt, and the poisonous elements will go through other parts of the body. If it's not cut off, then you can cut it off. Surgery, the modern time, we cut into the body with a knife, and they accepted that. Why? Because there is a bigger benefit, which is saving the life of the person. Chemotherapy for people who have cancer. All this stuff have been approved. Why? Because this maslaha is recognized, maslaha mu'tabara, even if it entails a minor harm. Palliative care, which is relieving the pains, not treating the disease, but relieving the pains around or caused by the disease, because the disease itself is not treatable, is not curable. So the only thing we do is that we relieve the pains of the people by using sedatives, morphine, and stuff like this. There are so many discussions about this. Even predictive medicine, that we just predicted the probability of the disease, not necessarily for us, but maybe for our future children, like premarital genetic testing and all types of genetic screenings. All these things have been approved largely speaking, by the religious scholars, because there is a maslaha which is recognized by Sharia. It's not contradicted by any important factor or element in the Sharia or in the religious sciences. Please, the next. But there is another, this is, by the way, some of the publications. So for the palliative, we have this publication, Palliative Care and Islamic Ethics, about the predictive. We have this one, Genomics in the Gulf region and Islamic Ethics. All these publications, by the way, are available on internet that you can download for free when you Google them. Okay, next, please. The other category, unrecognized maslaha. And this is much less in volume than the first category that we spoke about, but it does exist. So the medicine will come and say that there is a maslaha here, there is a benefit that I can achieve. But then the religious scholars would say, no, it's not recognized because there are other elements that should be considered. Let's take the very famous example in our modern time, euthanasia. Euthanasia has been approved for the first time by the Netherlands by the beginning of this century, I think 2001 or 2002. And other countries followed, I think Belgium, and I believe others will follow. One of the rare examples of more or less consensus or semi-consensus among religious scholars is that active euthanasia, that we actively terminate someone's life because there is an untreatable and unbearable pain, and the only way to put an end to this patient's pain is to terminate this patient's life. This is the euthanasia. And with the consent of the patient, approval of the physicians and all this stuff. Physicians are not the not objective is not to kill the person, but to relieve the pains of the person, etc. So the main benefit here is relieving this person from pain that they cannot otherwise stop. There is a clear benefit here. This was not recognized, first of all, because there are clear scriptural references prohibiting terminating one's own life, and even some references in the hadith prohibiting wishing death because of problems that someone come across, whether these problems were physical or psychological or whatever. Also, authority over one's body. The one who created the body, that's God, is the one who owns the one who owns the body. Okay, is the one who owns the body, and our position over our body is the position of a trustee. God entrusted us to take care of the body, and within this position of a trustee, you cannot decide about its end because you didn't decide about its beginning. Also, they didn't accept the idea that pain is meaningless. So some atheists and some physicians would say, what's the point of leaving someone suffering so much? For what? What's the reason? There is no benefit for this person or even for the family. What is the point? They said, yes, there is no point if you think about this life only. Even this life, we can argue, but the main benefit here is for the hereafter, that all these pains come in the hereafter. Also, some criticism, even from some secular perspectives, they said that euthanasia can give us a false impression that we can put an end to people's pain through improving medicine, although great deal of the pains that we have in this life is not because the failure of medicine, but because the failure of our humanities. That people die because they don't have food, that people die because of wars, and they suffer because they are refugees and they lost their family members, etc. These are things that is not to be done by the medicine, but by improving our humanity itself. Anyhow, this is something that was not accepted. And there is another example that was not accepted under conditions, like assisted reproductive technologies. We help couples who cannot get children to get children through assisted technologies, technologies that will assist them to do that. And the great benefit here is treating infertility, which can be easily linked to preserving offspring, حفظ النسل, for instance. But again, they said, no, but this is not everything. You have to take care that there is lineage. People who go to the infertility clinic to get children, they could have got children through adoption, for instance. But they go to the IVF clinic because they want to have their own children, not just children, their own children who belong to them. So this is the lineage, the nasab. And they said that nasab, I detailed this in a publication that we will see later. They said this nasab has conditions. There must be marriage between the two partners. So any assisted reproductive technologies outside marriage will not be accepted. There must be biological relatedness, which we call juristic term al-ba'diyya, or أن تكون من صلبه. أن يكون الولد من صلبه. So the mother contributes material, which we now call egg. The father contributes a material which we now call sperm. In the past, we call this al-ma'an, the two waters. Anyhow, so there must be biological relatedness, and there must be a sexual, intimate relationship between the married couple to get children. Assisted reproductive technologies can overturn the sexual intercourse. They said yes, this is acceptable because we have rare instances in the past that it could be surpassed, but 1 and 2 cannot be. So for the sake of getting children, we cannot marginalize the element of marriage or the element of biological relatedness. Can we go to the next, please? This is a publication about this issue of assisted reproductive technologies that you can also find on the internet. Yes, please, can we go? The last typology is the controversial cases, because the different elements in the reasoning process are not that clear. So you will find the religious scholars divided about whether we have here more benefit than harm or more harm than benefit. And like organ transplantation. In the beginning of the discussion, they said organ transplantation is incompatible with the religion of Islam. You say, but this is saving life that cannot be saved otherwise. They said yes, but there are other problems, like mutilating body. You cut into the body, especially if this body is a dead person. Authority over body. We are not the owners of our bodies to donate parts of it. By time, things changed because of the type of medical knowledge revealed to these scholars and the success rate of the organ transplantation itself. So we are not speaking about maslahatun mawhuma. You have heard this yesterday, fictitious benefit. We think that there is a benefit, but actually there is no. Some religious scholars thought so, because the success rate of organ transplantation in the beginning, when it started in the 50s, was quite low. But by time, especially with introducing immunosuppressive drugs, revolution happened in this transplantation surgeries, and the success rate increased dramatically. So they spoke about this is not mutilating the body, it's about new type of medical treatment. We just were shocked. It was a shock effect that you treat humans through organs of other humans. Usually we use other materials in the universe. So this was a controversial still, but we have now more or less a mainstream position saying that the benefits are more than the harms, accepted. The DNA paternity, that if we have a married couple and the husband wants to say that he doesn't believe that the child is his, he did not impregnate his wife. In the modern time, we can do DNA testing and we know if this is true or not. But so shall we do that? When we have this problem, husbands who have problems with their wives, they would say, okay, we do that. The majority of religious scholars still now say, no, we cannot do that. Why? Because again, the scriptural reference. We have a clear case stated in the Quran that when we have this, we have a procedure, the judiciary procedure called li'an, mutual offers of condemnation. Each of the couple would give an oath saying that I am innocent and this one is falsely accusing me of that. And then it comes to an end, and so there is irrevocable divorce, a separation between the two. and the child will be attributed to the woman, and that's it. They said in the DNA, they said we have to keep this process. We cannot make this process redundant and use instead of it DNA paternity. First, it is mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah, practiced throughout history. The second thing is that in the case of li'an, we do not reveal who made a mistake. That the husband is a liar or the woman committed adultery. We don't reveal. It's this, each one swears that I didn't do that. But in the case of DNA paternity, we reveal who is wrong. So there is the moral value of covering people's moral defects, etc. And this linked to the higher object, one considered by some religious scholars is حفظ العرض. Sometimes they link to حفظ النسل, so protecting honor or protecting offspring or lineage, etc. Also, women's interests. There was a big debate about this. So that if we reveal the women who made a mistake will be revealed, but the men who made the mistakes will not be revealed because maternity is proved by empirical evidence. The woman gets pregnant and she delivers. No one can deny this, but the man can make mistakes with other women, and we will not know that. So it will be only against the woman. Others would say, okay, but what about the child's interest? That the child will not be attributed, will not have a father, for instance. So this made it controversial, but in the first case, the majority went with the medical practice. Here, it went against this practice. And now my conclusions. Next, please. Do all the next till you finish. Yes, that's it. Yes, that's it. So this is what I end with, that medicine itself is maslaha. Medicine itself is maslaha. But maslaha in medicine as one of the elements of the is just one element when the religious scholars speak about it, like treating infertility, for instance, like knowing who is the biological father. All these are masalih, benefits. But is this the only thing through which we judge an act as good or bad? No. It's much more complex. The reasoning process is much more complex. So do we have scriptural references referring to the case or to specific values related to the case? The scholarly legacy, what did the religious scholars say about all these issues throughout history? The medical knowledge itself, is it certain? Is it a matter of probability? Do the religious scholar in question have access to this medical knowledge or to that type of medical knowledge? What is still missing, even with all these collective discussions, the other factors, like, for instance, assisted reproductive technologies. The physicians, they want people to get children. This is all what they care about. Religious scholars would jump in to say, no, but besides this noble aim in medicine, there are also noble aims by protecting people's lineage. And this lineage necessitates other factors. And all what they care about is that all components, egg, sperm, uterus, everything is coming from a married couple during their marital relationship. But they don't think about others, like, for instance, social justice. This IVF, how much does it cost? In some countries, it's not covered by health insurance, and it's quite expensive. So you end up giving this opportunity of getting children for only rich people. And the poor people, if they have infertility problems, they will not have. So is this good? Is there maslaha herein? Because of the limited group of stakeholders, sometimes this is a bit vague, and it's not thick enough, the process of reasoning. This is what I had. I have to stop here. Otherwise, Dr. Ray will be angry with me. So thank you very much for your listening and for your patience with me.
And thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, we have a lot of questions, and I don't think we're going to have time to answer them all, unless you can try and be brief in your answers. So let us go straight ahead. And and some of them are really interesting. First question is it?
Ray, we finish at 2, huh? We need to finish at 2?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we could go, I'm still waiting to see if Dr. Sharouk has arrived yet, but I don't know yet. So,
okay.
First question from Mohammed Mural is it the medicine revealed or the knowledge of medicine, namely treatment?
Yes, it's the knowledge, like religion, it's the knowledge of the religion. So the point is that, and this is mentioned in one of the prophetic traditions, speaking about disease and medicine, with dawa, and says that anzala, sending down, which is the very similar term used for the revelation, anzala also. So God, this is the perception that they are all coming from God, that we know why the disease happens and how to treat. This is something revealed by God, uncovered to the humans by God. Yeah.
The second question from Saif Ali. What is the meaning of intellect in the 5 maqasid? Do we mean it in the sense of mental health, or do we mean freedoms of thought and expression?
Yeah, this is a very big issue. Hifz al-Aql is very broad, and it has a very broad scope. Some, for instance, would say education is one of the important means to protect people's intellect. Some say prohibiting alcohol and drugs like heroin and cocaine and all this stuff is to protect people's intellect. It's a whole issue. So I just handled it as far as it relates to the discussions on medical ethics.
Thank you. Aisha Malik, in the case of seeking treatment, there are different views of the 4 schools of jurist schools. Does this not cause confusion for doctors?
Yes, this is a good question. The mainstream position adopted by the dominant majority of the religious scholars is that medical treatment is permissible. As I mentioned in the beginning, in the overall framing section of my talk, it's maslaḥa, it's benefit, and it is part of God's intention to maximize people's benefits in this life and in the hereafter. So, and that's why it's permissible. Why was it not considered obligatory, for instance? Some said if it is certain and someone's life is at risk, then it is obligatory, but the classical religious scholars said very exceptional cases, etc. But there is a very nice explanation for Imam Shatibi. He said that when a human instinct is active, Sharia does not interfere. So, for instance, eating, drinking is permissible. I can eat apple, I can eat orange, I can eat now, I can eat after 1 hour, etc. Why did Sharia not make it obligatory? Because I will eat. When I feel hungry, I will eat. I don't have to have a scripture to tell me that you have to eat. This is my nature and I will do it. So when I get really sick, I will go to the hospital. Anyhow, no worries. So that's why Sharia goes back and let this to the human nature to handle it. Yes.
Thank you. Some students have put more than one question, so I'm going to do one question per person for now, and if we have time, we'll go back.
Okay.
So from Maha Kalsoom, when we have benefits and harms for a given issue, how do the jurists ascertain that one of these two has more magnitude than the other? In other words, how do they determine which is more?
Yes, as I said in the last slide, what I see by studying a wide range of issues is that they consider, in principle, anything coming from medicine implies a benefit. Physicians wouldn't come with something that's just harmful for the people. There must be something in it. So they will take this seriously, that in principle, there is a benefit for it. The question here, is this benefit, which is medical and physical and health related in nature, contradicts a much more compelling benefit that we can know from somewhere else? That's the big question that they handle. So they check their other sources of knowledge. So now we have knowledge about a certain issue coming from this physician, this patient. I need to discuss the biomedical knowledge in general. So I need to consult other physicians, other biomedical scientists to know how far is this applies to a great number of people. But there is also religious knowledge. There is the scripture. And the greatest benefit that we need to achieve is salvation in the hereafter. So are we going to commit a greater harm, in this case, religious harm, to ourselves? This is what they do. So they have an issue at hand, and then they go to the bigger picture by consulting religious sources of knowledge, including the scriptures and the scholarly legacy, and the biomedical sources of knowledge coming from the physicians that they have access to, or the sources that they have access to. On the basis of this, they can come to a conclusion. So there is a complex process of reasoning. It's not just it's beneficial, so it's fine, or it's harmful, it's fine. No. Chemotherapy is quite harmful and painful, but they permitted it. Why? Because there is a greater benefit, which is saving life, and so on.
Thank you very much. This is from Ramzi Roulad. Now it's quite there are a number. I think all of these are not separate questions, but a statement about his position. Let me read it out. It's quite long. As a spiritual counselor, I am often confronted with the question of whether the treatment of a person who is breathing on their own but has been declared brain dead can be stopped. As far as my knowledge reaches, religious scholars have not allowed this.
Yes, I understand the question.
The doctors, a conflict arises. They do not see maṣlaḥa in further treatment, but rather mafsada. It costs money and gives false hope to the family, etc. And as a spiritual counselor, I have no partial authority, as the professor suggests in his article. And the conflict with the doctors takes on a new dimension and becomes more complicated when I also inform the family in question about this hukum. What do you advise me to do in such situation, knowing that I am working in a non-Islamic country, namely the Netherlands? I assume that in Islamic countries, people are more receptive to religious ahkam. I assume that in Islamic countries, doctors are more receptive to religious ahkam.
Thank you, Rams. This is one of the big questions, which is usually in intensive care and palliative care context. If I understand the question correctly, we have a case of brain dead person, someone who is diagnosed with brain death. Someone who is diagnosed with brain death, as far as I know, cannot breathe on his own or in her own. It must be through life support machines, resuscitators, resuscitation system. So the question here to switch on, to keep the resuscitation system or life support machines on, or we can put them off. That's the big question. In the contemporary discussions, two of the three institutions I spoke about in my presentation said brain death is death. So when someone is diagnosed with brain death, this person is simply dead. So his wife becomes a widow, his inheritance can be divided among the heirs, just a dead person, even if through these machines, human body organs are still seemingly functioning. Only the one in Mecca, they said, no, the person is dying, but not yet dead. Okay. This is for the position of the person as living or dead. Now about the life support machines. keep them on, or can we switch them off? They all agree that we can switch off life support machines. They all agree that we can. Why? Because death is not irreversible. If someone is dead, why are you going to give this person treatment? It doesn't make any sense. And if the person is dying, the dying process is also irreversible. Once you get into the dying process, so it means the soul is departing the body, this also cannot be reversed. And keeping the life support machine would just prolong the dying process, which is not for the benefit of the patient. So they all said that you can switch off life support machines. These are the institutional position. There are still some individual religious scholars who think otherwise, and they say you have to keep them. But I tell you, this has to do more with the understanding of these individual religious scholars about what brain death actually is. I believe if they have the right information, they would think differently. About life support machines on and off, not about being alive or dead. This is another question. So they can switch off the life support machines according to the dominant majority now. Yes, they can.
Okay, thank you very much. From Mohammed Mughal again, in terms of modern medicine, which brings its side effects or harm, what is the stance of Islamic biomedical ethics? Does Islamic ethics allow to create this kind of medicine which cure a damage on the stake of other? I don't really understand that, but I think it has to do with side effects. In other words, there are certain harms that are brought by certain medical interventions, side effects of drugs and so on and so forth, which create harm.
The one I spoke about in the beginning, Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam, in his book قواعد الأحكام في مصالح الأنام, he spoke clearly about this, that we do in Sharia the same physicians do with medicine. He said it's hardly conceivable that you will have pure benefits against pure harms. But most of the time, you have to judge cases in which harms are mixed with other harms or with other benefits, and benefits mixed with other benefits or other harms. And this is the issue. The Imam Al-Ghazali says, ليس الخير أن تعرف الخير والشر فذلك يعرفه كل أحد. It's not that difficult to know the good and the bad. Everyone can do. But the art is to know the better of the two good and the worse of the two evil. So to think that there is a medicine purely beneficial, there is no single side effects or vice versa, hardly exists. Most of the time, it's about this balance. And that's why there are institutions for approving medicine, like the vaccination. Now we have the FDA in the United States. There are other bodies in the European Union, etc. This is their work for saying that we have a greater benefit than the harm implied. And once this is done, usually religious scholars accept it.
Okay, thank you. From Maha Khosum, for DNA paternity, how do the jurists decide which to give more importance, covering the issue versus preserving the accuracy of lineage?
Yes. No, it's not that. It's not that preserving only the lineage and covering people's defects or the value of citra. The lineage in Islam is a complex issue. Is not only DNA. Is not only biological. I spoke about 3 elements. So, for instance, marriage. You get children within a family, not just because 2 persons had intimate relationship with each other. There must be marital relationship, and this marital relationship entails a group of rights and obligations on both parties, and it's a religious also obligation, not just a civil or contractual one. So without marriage, in principle, there is no paternity. If there is no marriage, there is no paternity. So knowing that X is the biological father of Y doesn't mean the recognized father according to Islamic law. It's much more complex than that. And by the way, even in the West, it's not only DNA. It's the contract in the Western law or legal bioethics in the West. The one who has the contract becomes the father and the mother. So maybe I am not the one who gave the sperm. I am not the one who gave the eggs, but I and my couple, we made a contract with people who will provide this, and they signed that I'll be the parent. This is also acceptable. So it's much more complex than DNA only.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. We don't have any further questions on the Q&A, but okay, in the last 2 minutes that we have left, okay, so yeah, Aisha Malik just posted, in the case of a man who has 2 wives and one is infertile, can she get IVF from the ova of the other wife and husband's sperm?
Yes, this is a very famous case in the modern discussions on the IVF treatment or assisted reproductive technologies. In case of polygamy, that someone is married to 2 wives and it happens that they have very good relations with each other. So they want to help each other to get children. Someone has problems with the uterus and the other one has problems with the eggs. So can one donate the eggs to the other one in order to get children because we have the same husband? This issue was discussed by the Islamic Academy in Mecca, one of the 3 institutions I spoke about. And they said in the session they discussed this in the beginning that it's possible. Why? Because it all happens within marriage. And we know the father, the one who gave the egg and the one who gave birth, etc. So they said that possible. But the next year directly, they retracted the fatwa and they said this case is also not possible. I personally think that that's true, that's right. And all other institutions also agree with that. It's not right to do IVF within polygamy. Why? Besides all the technicalities about who will be the mother, the one who gave the egg or the one who was pregnant for 9 months. Outside this, it looks like as if we think the most important here element in marriage is that we know the father, the husband, because it's one. And this one, there are no barriers and no walls separating his marriage with X and Y. So it's not one marriage in which we have 2 wives. No, we have 2 marriages, 2 marital contracts. Each woman has her own independent, distinct marital contract. You cannot cross over these marital contracts by copying and pasting genetic material from this one and that one. I don't think this is possible, and this is not why marriage has been done. This is one. The second thing, there must be informed consent. The woman should agree to that. You will say to me, yes, for sure, in polygamy, always co-wives have problems, but it can happen that they are good with each other. Yes, it can happen. But we all know that the standard policy will be as following. A rich couple who have problems to get the children, they will find a poor woman who come to help them get the child, whether donating the uterus by becoming pregnant or donating the egg when the rich wife cannot produce the egg. And once they get the children, she will be more or less like a maid, taking care if she remained and if she was not divorced immediately after that. We need to keep this in mind and to be realistic that this will be usually the case. So there are many problems for this issue. That's why I personally think not possible. No, it's not only social justice. Social justice is one of the factors. I told you, we will have a problem with maternity. Who is the mother? Who is the mother? Usually the mother in the Islamic discussions, the wife, she's married, so she is a wife. Second, she is pregnant. Third, and gave the child. And third, she gave the egg, the ma', the water. In this case, this will not be the case. So if we remain very traditional, it will be problematic. If we kept the social justice dimension, it will be just catastrophic.
Okay, thank you. Look, there is one last question just came in on the chat box, okay, which is topical. So I'll put it to you. 2 men aged 30 and 42 enter the ICU with COVID-19, but the maximum capacity has already been reached nationwide. What now? Should a patient who has bad odds...
Again, the last part, Ray, sorry.
What now? Should a patient who has bad odds make way for one of these young men who may have a better chance of survival? And which of them? What does the Sharia say?
It's about vaccination?
It's about treatment.
Or ICU, huh?
Yeah, about treatment, ICU, yeah.
About ICU, because, no, there are differences. Right. If it is ICU, so we have COVID-19 patients who are admitted to the hospital and they need life support machines to save their lives. Yeah?
Yeah.
And we need to prioritize them.
The hospital is full. These are... So...
And there is a place for only one.
There's a place for no one. There's no more places. So what do you do? Do you take somebody out with higher odds or with a higher risk of dying and allow somebody with a younger person to take their place?
Yes. I wrote an article, a piece about this, co-authored by another colleague, about triage, as we call it in the case of a pandemic. Dr. Mu'taz al-Khatib, he wrote an article in Arabic about this on Al Jazeera. It's a very complex issue, but we have governing principles. One of them is what makes the act good is that we save as many lives as possible. So if we have 5 people who are waiting, lining up, and we have place for only 4, who is that 5th that will not go there? Or we have only 1 and 4 will be done. The first one, we have to say that once we put this person on life support machine, we are able to save this person's life, as per our knowledge, as humans. We think it will save this person's life. If not, then the person will be disqualified. So the person has underlying conditions. Whatever we do, it's just a matter of minutes or hours and the person will die. Should I still do that and leave the others because this person arrived at the hospital earlier, for instance? No. Then we give the person whose life can be saved. This should be the governing principle in this regard. And the details are in the publications that I told you about.
Thank you very much. I think at that point we are over time. So, well, that was a wonderful session. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. So thank you very much. I was just very concerned that you didn't make it, but you must have been, you were with the attendees, and that's why you couldn't unmute. Okay, thank you. It's very, very good to see you. So let me introduce Dr. Sharouk Naguib, who's an Associate Professor of Middle Eastern Studies at Lancaster University in England, and Mr. Mahmoud Afifi, who is assisting her, who is a doctoral student in religious studies at Lancaster University. Of course, all of the bios are in the program for you to get more information about each of the speakers. So without further ado, Dr. Sharouk, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just Yeah, just on the administrative side of things, Mahmoud will share the presentation and we will choreograph it between both of us. So I'm just waiting for Mahmoud to share the slides.
Okay.
Yeah, I can share menu active.
Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah.
Just while we're waiting for the slides to be shared, to say that Mahmoud is at the end of his doctoral research and has produced a very interesting and relevant doctoral thesis related to the topic that we're talking about together. So this is collaborative work, but it builds on both my research and his PhD.
So for this presentation, Dr. Shrouk and I were discussing how gender issues can be situated within the modern discourse of Maṣlaḥa. And from our literature on the Quranic interpretation, we have noticed that Islamic feminists rarely refer to Maṣlaḥa in their feminist hermeneutics, even though their feminist hermeneutics can be situated within the modern discourse of Maṣlaḥa as discussed by some scholars of contemporary Islam. So when Dr. Shrouk is back, she can tell us more about the investigation of gender issues within the modern concept of Maṣlaḥa, according to some contemporary scholars of Islam. But for me, I would like to focus more on the contribution of the Islamic feminists to the reinvigoration of the concept of Maṣlaḥa in their writings. And I would like to draw a comparison in Al-Shatibi concept of Maṣlaḥa and the feminist hermeneutics regarding how each treats the distinction between al-kulliyat and al-juz'iyat, or the universals and the particulars of Sharia. And with detailing such distinction in each literature, I would like first to give a general definition about kulliyat and what is meant by juz'iyat. So kulliyat are universals or overarching principles of Sharia which inform and guide the process of reaching the particular readings of the text. And juz'iyat, generally defined as well, refer to the particular readings of the text, which are based on kulliyat or the universal principles of Sharia. Now moving to the difference between how Shatibi treated kulliyat and juz'iyat, and how feminist exegetes as well treated this distinction between kulliyat and juz'iyat.
Mahmoud,
yes?
just to tell you that Dr. Shrouk is back, so you can coordinate with her for the continuation. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Shrouk.
Yeah, you keep going, Mahmoud.
Okay, thank you. So my comparison will be based on 3 points to clarify within Ash-Shatibi's exposition of Maṣlaḥa and kulliyat and juz'iyat, and the feminist hermeneutics regarding universals and particulars. So the 3 points are baseline, holistic approach, and determination of universals. For Ash-Shatibi and the feminist exegetes, the baseline is the same. So kulliyat and universals as universals are the universals upon which particulars are based. So you have a universal principle, and then you have a particular reading of the text that is based on this kulli or this universal principle. For the holistic approach, for Ash-Shatibi, universals are induced from a holistic reading of the Sharia in its entirety, including the religious text, its particular interpretations over history, and usuli legal methodology as well. But for the feminists, when it comes to this approach, we find this holistic approach in the following terms. A holistic ethical reading of the divine text, only the divine text, not necessarily they draw from the interpretations of the text. They confine themselves to the divine text in order to establish a certain the veracity of certain universals emerging outside it. For how each would determine the definition of universals, for Shatibi, universals are determined by inductive reasoning, with no textual evidence available to prove them in explicit terms. So Shatibi, when he says the maqsad or maslaḥa or the universal is to protect the life, he is saying categorically, there is nothing in the Quran that says this is like a universal that we need to interpret the Quran through it, but it just he induced this kulli from a holistic reading of the Sharia without a contextual evidence available in explicit terms. And for the feminists, universals are induced in light of the ethical worldview of the Quran, whose definition is not fully realized at one particular moment in history or even a particular person in history. So their universals are still induced from Sharia, like justice or ethics, but these universals are not fully realized at one moment in history or to a particular person in history. If we look in this comparison, the outcomes of both, of the comparison for both and Al-Shatibi, I can just summarize the following. Kulliyat are universals or overarching principles which inform the process of reaching particular readings of the text. To Al-Shatibi, universals are whatever secure the rest of people in this life and the life hereafter. To the feminist exegetes, however, the universal is whatever is perceived as conforming with the ethical worldview of the Quran, methodological tension that will be tackled hereafter. Juz'iyat are particular rulings for Ash-Shatibi subject to universals, whereas for feminist exegetes reject the particular as male exegetes historical readings. The feminist distinction between kulliyat and juz'iyat becomes associated with a distinction between revelation and text, prioritizing the ethical over the linguistic. I would go back to Dr. Shurk if she wants to give her reflections about the topic in general and about the limitations of feminist hermeneutics as well. Back to you, Dr. Shurk.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Thank you very much. Following on from Mahmoud's comparison between conceptions of the universal and the particular, both based on the usuli tradition through Al-Shatibi, and then compared and contrasted with feminist approaches to the universal and particular, some of the limitations that emerge in the approaches to the Quran and how the Quran is understood within the works that we have so far in the genre we might call feminist interpretation of the Quran. So the interpretations often start from a purportedly universal ethical values, which are read into the Quran, seen as indicated in the Quran. But the source of these values, of these universal precepts, the evidence for them is often ambiguous. And there is the outcome of this is a delinking of the text from its history, because the universal precepts seem to come from outside, such as a liberal notion of equality being read into the text, something that Aisha Hidayatullah points out, despite the fact that the history of the text is encoded in its textual structure, the history of the early community, the types of questions they asked, the history of its reception is also important for understanding of the building up of the linguistic knowledge that led to the readings that we have in the overall hermeneutic venture of Islam. So this is one important problematic. And the other one is a narrow conception of textuality as semantic, not stylistic. So this narrow conception of textuality leads to ignoring the fact that the Quran speaks about its own language as eloquent, as poetic. For example, Western scholars of the Quran, such as Stefan Wierd and Angelica Newvert, pointed out to the necessity of understanding the Quran's own declarations, self-declarations about the nature of its textuality. And this is something that the Reformist Project has emphasized. The poetic, stylistic dimension of the Quran is not just an outward ornament, it's configurative of its very meaning. So feminist hermeneutics engages the semantic but not the poetic and the stylistic, and brings in universal values that are then read into the Quran. So this renders such a hermeneutic exclusionary, because all past readings in their entirety are historical. As Mahmoud pointed out, the particular readings are historicized. And I mean by tafsir here, not just the tafsir genre, but as I said, the hermeneutic endeavor of the Islamic tradition. The past readings are then configured, we might even say disfigured, as male-centered and patriarchal. And there is an inherent contradiction here that is worthy of spending maybe a few moments on, which is the assigning of historicity to the tradition. So the particular readings of the tradition are historical or historically specific, whereas the feminist reclamation of Quranic meaning is not, and can infer the universals from the Quran in an ahistorical way. So there isn't enough recognition, enough reflection on the historicity of the feminist project itself. So the inherent methodological tension here is that either one accepts the text as potentially yielding universal precepts open to readers of different generations, of different genders, and that for understanding these universal precepts, we not only need to engage the Quran, but need to engage its reception history or the previous readings of the fuqaha and the mufassirin. Or one understands that we read the Quran through our historical conditionedness, and in that way, and if that's the case, then the Mufassir's reading or the reading of the tradition is historical as well as is the reading of the feminist. So the universal is always bounded by the historical. You can't choose historicity for the tradition and universal readings as more possible for the contemporary feminist reading. There's also, this is a side point, as the tradition is assigned to historicity, there is a sense in which the patriarchy or the male centeredness of it is reified as if it persists through history but transcends it in some way. And I'm happy to explore that point in the Q&A. Mahmoud, can you turn to the next slide?
Yeah.
So drawing on Ash-Shatibi, establishing the universals is derived from a holistic reading of textual evidence. Trying to fathom some of these universals from the textual evidence ala jumla. This includes taking into consideration historical interpretations. Such readings, he emphasizes, must pay attention to the Arabic language usage. The text must be understood in conformity with the linguistic and cultural norms of the Arabs to whom the Quran was revealed. This is an important dimension of early reformist discourse on reading the Quran in light of the language of the 7th century Arabs and the styles of eloquence and the kinds of cultural and social norms that and literary norms that these styles embraced or indicated. This, we would say, Mahmoud and I are arguing. Can you hold on a second, Mahmoud? Yeah. Mahmoud and I are arguing that what Shatibi seems to suggest here is a hermeneutic approach that could, from a reading of the textual Quran, a holistic reading of the Quran, universal precepts could be inferred as indicators to Maṣlaḥa, but in the initial stage, the universals or the universal ethical precepts need to be garnered from the text. We can move on now. So one of the closest schools to the soul of Shatibi is the school of Aisha Abdul Rahman and Sheikh Amin al-Khuli. Well, I should put Sheikh Amin al-Khuli first, but actually Aisha Abdul Rahman bint al-Shati and the School of Literary Interpretation and Tafsir al-Adabi she has contributed greatly to its development. So in her work, in her 2 volumes on the Quran interpretation, or the stylistic, or al-Tafsir al-Bayani, stylistic interpretation of the Quran, she explained that it's not the style that is the purpose of the interpretation, but that's the means for understanding the ethical precepts, al-usul al-kubra. She didn't use maqasid like Amin al-Khuli. She used the term al-usul al-kubra, universal ethical precepts that will emerge through a cross-referencing, a systematic linguistic approach to the text of the Quran as an organic text that requires cross-referencing, contextual analysis of the textual context, and that is highly attentive to the literary. This, for her, requires a hermeneutic that is opposite to that of the feminists, one that is inclusive and integrative of both the text and that which surrounds the text. But in her, we see a different kind of dynamic, whereby what surrounds the text, the historical, is actually measured against the textual. So all historical information, including Asbabun Nuzul, the tafsir tradition, both in terms of its linguistic disciplines, grammatical efforts, stylistic reflections, all of this that surrounds the text is taken into consideration, but then measured against the text itself. This she calls the concept of Al-Ihtikam. And I just like to note now, and we can discuss later, that Ihtikam is different to Ijtihad and is worthy of some thinking as to how that changes the agency of the interpreter, the female interpreter in this case. So she defines it simply as muhtakima, seeking judgment from the Quran alone, guided by the meticulous examination of its lexicon, thoughtful consideration of its context, and contemplative listening to the intimations of expression in this unique type of inimitable eloquence. The inimitability and the literary nature of the Quran style is primary, is foregrounded in her work. But the assessment of what's surrounding the text and making a judgment about meaning is in the end subject to this ihtikam to the Quran's textual structures. And just to, I'm wary of time, I don't know when we started exactly, so, but just to try to give you an example of how she actually manages to respond to what Kamali at the beginning of this talk, we said he calls for, which is trying to provide textual evidence for the conception of gender equality in the Quran, is really the maqsid of the text to achieve musawa, or equality between men and women. So Aisha Abdul Rahman in her work starts first with the Meccan surahs, almost in agreement with the Shatibi, I would say. The extent to which she engages Shatibi, I'm not aware of, but there seems to be some echoes of understanding the Meccan surahs as more conducive to exploring these ethical universals, or al-usul al-kubra. So she, in her first two tafsirs, she comes across some of the Meccan surahs which refer to the idea, the notion of insan. And I've chosen her treatment of a specific verse, Ar-Rahman, علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. Turn to the next slide, please, Mahmoud. So in her exploration in Maqal fil Insan, which is an extensive treatment that follows from At-Tafsir al-Bayani, that comes as a conclusion of an open-ended inquiry that did not bring any expectation to the text, that started from what the text is actually trying to say. She comes to the conclusion that humanity, after looking at the 63 instances which mention al-insan with alif lam, which she accepts that the tafsir understands as genus, nu'a, or as insan, as a concept with an ungendered concept of insan. She accepts that this understanding of humanity is a mode of existence higher than mere physicality, bashariya, non-savagery, insiya. And key to the realization of this humanity is bearing of an ethical responsibility. This is now not new. It has been, this is well-trodden, a well-trodden route to emphasize humanity as the anchor for thinking about equality. But I think Bint al-Shati is unique in proceeding to develop a theology which grounds interpretative capacity on the association of the words bayan and insan. So the notion of insan predicates a notion of equality in which ethical responsibility is expected of both men and women. She's still not talking about gender in Maqal fil Insan. And then through the verse in Surah Al-Rahman, خلق الإنسان علمه البيان, she associates the words bayan and insan, and looking at the words of bayan as as it appears in this form in the Quran, as well as other derivatives, including the word bayinat, in referring to the Quran itself. Mahmoud, can we turn to the next slide? She comes to, her assessment is that bayan means clarity, revealing elucidation, and it's different from nutq, and never associated with animals except figuratively, and that it is always a referent, or the referent of bayan is always a human referent, and hence its technical usage for ilmul bayan, so to speak. So core to the humanity is not the ethical responsibility, not the vicegerency, not the ability to reason only, but the ability to perceive, discern, clarify meaning through language. So explaining that eloquent articulations of meaning have come to be designated in Arabic as bayan, she also points out that the Quran attributes bayan to itself and gives the meaning twofold, whereby humanity and the Quran are both associated with bayan. So the Quran is bayan as eloquent speech, and humanity has the capacity to do bayan in order to interpret this linguistically perfect and beautiful language. So where does gender equality come in this? So in a later article, just in the same year, Bint al-Shati writes a short treatise for a lecture in Durman University in the late 1960s on Al-Mafhum al-Islami li Tahrir al-Mar'a, the Islamic conception of liberating women. And in Al-Mafhum al-Islami li Tahrir al-Mar'a, she starts her article with both, she starts and ends her article with this verse, emphasizing that the practice of hermeneutics and women's engagement in the Islamic tradition with religious knowledge, with interpreting the Quran, with transmitting the hadith, with teaching the fiqh, is an aspect, or is an outcome of the understanding that of that equality and that taklif, that entrustment to do, in order to realize, to fully realize humanity, to interpret the Quran. So this is not surprising, given that she has called much earlier in the 1960s for making women, or for allowing women to become shaykhat Al-Azhar. To wrap up this section on Aisha Abdul Rahman, she was writing in the mid-20th century, and I think there are unique aspects to her approach which work within the framing of al-usul and work within the framing of the maqasidi approach, especially in relation to maslahas, to grounding maslaha in a hermeneutic approach to the universal principles of the Quran. She also brings back to our practice of engaging the Quran this awareness of the eloquence, the inimitability, the necessity of considering its style and not ignoring it. As Mahmoud said, as we said earlier, not making the ethical that stems from our modern experience be imposed on the linguistic nature of the Quran or on the linguistic content of the Quran, while also ignoring the Quran style. I'll hand over to Mahmoud because Mahmoud extends this model to take into consideration particular cases as well as the need for a grasp of reality and not just a grasp of the text. Over to you, Mahmoud.
If I could just intervene, just
please, yes.
Briefly. So far, we don't have any questions in the Q&A, but just to bear in mind that we only have another 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes for this session. So, I mean, from my point of view, I'm happy for you to continue until perhaps we get some questions to pose to you. You can continue, but
so I could just make one final comment on this, is that I found it very interesting to see that it's not just a question of equality. It's not a matter of rights. It's how the very entrustment, the idea of taklif, of insan, is connected with the realization of humanity with regard to interpreting the Quran, engaging the Quran, reflecting upon it. So her hermeneutic interpretation of equality is quite an interesting dimension that I don't think any of the feminist hermeneuticians manages to address because of that lack of attentiveness to the Quran's own stylistic and textual structures. Mahmoud.
My alternative approach to the one that is introduced by feminist exegetes builds up upon the textual treatment by Aisha Abdul Rahman of the Quranic text. However, what I'm doing is I'm adding the consideration of the empirical evidence in the interpretation of the Quran, something which Maṣlaḥa promotes, because as we know, there is this thing within Maṣlaḥa that considers reality and how the text can be situated within modern reality. So my alternative approach, what I suggest, is an approach that treats interpretation as a matter of application, not as a theory or a theoretical project. That is a matter of fiqh or political theology, where a text is understood in connection with reality. And this approach is both theoretical and empirical, where the interpreter uses qualitative research in investigating the extent to which practice is related to text for a better understanding of both. In order to interpret a text, for example, the interpreter needs to be aware of the text, its language, as meaning, as it's used in meaning, and its different interpretations, which belong to different interpretive communities in history, which means that we take into account all the traditional interpretations that belong to the text that we are interpreting so far. So mastering the past tradition of the text shall help the interpreter to achieve the following. First, understand such a tradition in its own terms and according to the arguments surrounding it. Examine the methods by which such a tradition developed. 3, be cautious about imposing modern projections on the tradition, which the tradition itself doesn't intend to support. Verify the relationship between the tradition and the reality for which we call the tradition to bear on. So it's an attempt, or it's a quest for understanding the tradition, and then how to understand it, or to reconstruct it in a modern reality in connection with a specific case in practice. The interpreter as well must understand the reality of the case on the ground and all its surrounding circumstances, which the text is taken to. The interpreter must then be able to verify the relationship between the text and the case which the text is called to address, so that the right question can be asked and the text be applied to the case appropriately. That is being able to determine how to apply and establish legal precedent. So instead of just rejecting the tradition or precedent that we have inherited from the past, we try to understand this precedent. We try to understand the methods and the principles upon which this precedent came to exist to start with, and then we try to see how this precedent can be negotiated, can be applied, can be modified, can be altered in connection with reality. This approach might appeal to Maṣlaḥa and the Maqasid, but as a not as a principle of substantive independent rationality, but as a principle whose scope of application should remain anchored to the principles of Usul al-Fiqh. So I argue here that Maṣlaḥa is not different from Usul al-Fiqh, and it should be situated within Usul al-Fiqh not as an independent source of knowledge, because anchoring Maṣlaḥa to Usul al-Fiqh will help us take into account the tradition and avoid the slippery slope that some contemporary Muslim scholars fell into when they try to use Maṣlaḥa in like as a broad category of reaching new rulings in our modern reality. But what we need to do is to connect this Maṣlaḥa with the principles of Usul al-Fiqh. Al-Shatibi himself explicitly in his book showed that Maṣlaḥa is discussed within Usul al-Fiqh, and the only point that he takes against Usul al-Fiqh or the fiqh tradition, it's just they fail to see the evidence in its holistic way, like to read the different textual evidence on a specific matter in connection with each other, like bringing the texts, all the texts that bear on a specific issue, and then we try to understand holistically these texts together, not as separate units. That's the only thing that he mentions. Or could have done better instead of treating the text as separate units or piecemeal account. Other than this, Al-Shatibi in many passages across his book Al-Muwafaqat, as far as I can tell, in the volumes of the book, he is always clear in connecting the Maṣlaḥa to the text, the Quran, and to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and to even the doctrine of Ijma'. So he mentions this word Ijma' many times across the book, that Maṣlaḥa should be understood within this Ijma'. So that's my argument, is to develop a textual approach that remains loyal and faithful to the tradition that we have inherited from the past, but at the same time we connect this tradition to our reality by conducting empirical studies so that we can better understand the tradition and better understand as well the reality. And of course, this won't prevent us at all from negotiating the text and negotiating the reality, as long as we distance ourselves from our personal preferences, and that's the issue with the feminist hermeneutics of the Quran, is that they are not able to distance themselves from their personal preferences of what the ethical can be defined, because their definition even of ethics or the ethical is very broad. It cannot be like defined in its explicit terms, and that is one of the flaws of the feminist hermeneutics.
Okay, thank you very much. There's very little time left for discussions, but we do have a few questions. Thank you very much for that extremely scholarly presentation. So the first question from Hira Amin is, what are the mainstream scholars' opinion on including gender equality as part of maqasid? Sorry. Is there a lot of resistance?
Are you there, Dr. Shrouk?
Yes, I will only comment on the view of Madrasat al-Tafsir al-Adabi, how actual ulama actually have responded to bringing in gender equality as a maqsid. I think some of the reformist speakers or interlocutors like Muhammad Hashim Kamali have attempted to include gender equality as a maqsid, but reception amongst the only ulama or the majority of ulama, this requires a study in itself. But on Bint al-Shati and the school of Tafsir al-Adabi, but specifically the way she positioned herself as belonging to the tradition in a critical, reflective way. So she refused to use the term maqsid, she used the term usul, and I think she wanted to connect herself with the theory of usul and not only to denote or to speak about general universal principles. So in her engagement with the Quran, she always engaged extensively the traditional readings in order to both justify their inclusion or exclusion depending on how they compare to the Quranic analysis. So her approach in the end provided extensive corroboration of the idea of equality by starting from exploring the notion of insan. That for her grounds the ontology of the Quran. She was, all I can say is that she was widely respected. She became professor of Quranic studies, Quranic and tafsir studies in Jamiat al-Qarawiyyin in Morocco. There is a whole school of tafsir in Morocco that follows her. So I think she's had a huge impact, and the idea itself, which is human equality or gender equality based on the notion of the human, which is not just anchored in the narrative of creation or in the unity of origin, but in the Quran's conception of the ethical trusteeship, our ethical trusteeship that for which we have been endowed with this hermeneutic ability. It's a much more complex and sophisticated idea that I think has been widely accepted, although not always understood in those nuanced terms. Maybe I should hand over to you, Mahmoud, if you want to comment on how the ulama would consider bringing in gender equality as a maqsid.
Yeah, as far as feminist exegetes are concerned, I would say they rarely refer to maqasid or maṣlaḥa in their feminist hermeneutics, and they have it's like a methodological tactic within their hermeneutics, because I remember I had a discussion with one of the feminist scholars, and she said still maṣlaḥa and maqasid are discussed within the traditional usuli methodology, which we don't like to use at all, and they rather situate themselves within the ethical trajectory within Sharia. So they refer to Al-Ghazali, they refer to Al-Shatibi, but in very generic terms, in the sense that they try to build their own ethical approach to the interpretation of the Quran. So they would rather use the word ethics instead of using the word usul or maqasid or maṣlaḥa or whatever might have any connection with the tradition.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Mushtaq Ahmed Sikandar. The text is always interpreted in a certain context. Regarding tradition, we should not make it sacred and transcendental. There is a lot of contradictions about what can be called tradition. In tradition, women imams are not accepted as mainstream, but now women imams is a reality. Same is the case with women going to masjids, that is debarred in Hanafi tradition. So how do we reconcile these contradictions?
Okay, yeah, I'll try to answer as best as I understood. I might need your help again, Ray, to reiterate the question.
Yeah.
So yes, what Aisha Abdurrahman and I've positioned myself within that school, and specifically with her interpretation of Amin al-Khouli's approach, because I don't agree with Amin al-Khouli on his approach to the tradition. His was one that attempted to kill the tradition by researching it and moving beyond it. She was perhaps as a woman from a background of Islamic education, within which she really fought for her place and status and attempted to be more conciliatory with the tradition in order to maintain her authority as a alima from a house of ulama. She argued that the tradition, with all its problems and contradictions, still provides an insight into the meaning of the text. That reception history, ما حول النص, there is a necessary journey. But instead of killing it by research, قتله بحثا, as Amin al-Khouli said, we engage it critically, and where there are issues with it, where we see a problem with it, linguistically or ethically or legally, we assess it by recourse to the Quran, ihtikam ila al-Quran, but positing the particular readings to the kulliyat, to the usul of the meaning of the Quran as a whole. And I'll give you a very mundane example. So in Surah Al-Takathur, she reflects on the meaning of the word na'im at the end of the surah. And then on that day, you will be asked about na'im. Now, the Mufassirs have understood na'im in so many ways. This is just a simple example, as the benefit of having a slipper, the benefit of having a shade, the great benefits of having revelation and the Prophet. And she goes on to say, these are all meanings which are based on the meaning, the lexical meaning of na'im, the lexicality of the Quran, but they fail to compare this occurrence in the whole texture of the Quran's, in the whole structure of the Quran, in the different contexts in which the word na'im occurs. And she comes to the conclusion that the usage of this form na'im is specific to Jannatun Na'im, as it's always used in the Quran, except in this context. But this context refers to the hereafter, so it must be taken as Jannatun Na'im. So she uses the tradition, so to speak, on this mundane occasion to explore where the meaning, where the lexical genealogy of the meaning of na'im comes from, establishes it, and then decides what it means with the help of the Quran, with ihtikam to the Quran. I think this approach could also help with regard to law and to issues of law, where the meaning of the Quran as a whole becomes the final arbitrator on the readings within the tradition. So we're always working, holding the two together, the universal meanings of the Quran and the particular readings of fiqh, or the particular readings throughout the Islamic tradition with all its religious disciplines. So if we have a specific case such as leadership of Al-Azhar, Imadat Al-Azhar or Maṣlaḥa Al-Azhar. She comes to the conclusion based on her understanding of the text as a whole in relation to Al-Insan that min haqqul mara, it is women are entitled to become shaykhat of Al-Azhar. So she uses the universal to assess the tradition and then, but not exclude it, not write it off as completely contradictory and hence lacking in benefit. And I think that one thing that I would like to emphasize is there is a greater benefit, a greater maslaha to be considered when it comes to our epistemic paradigm. So we're thinking about masalih in a socio-political context, but we're not thinking about masalih at the intellectual level, despite the fact that one of the maqasid al-sharia is hifzul aql. But one aspect of hifzul aql, in my view, is to have an epistemic paradigm that looks at continuities, at our cultural continuities, considers those linkages with the past. So writing off the tradition, some of my feminist colleagues totally dislike this term. I would consider is a rupture, is a violent rupture with the past that is unnecessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Yeah, I was going to suggest shorter answers at this point. If we have to get through these questions, I'm not sure that we will. But let me, because they're just all coming in now. So from Mawahib Al-Bakr, the concept of insan as a base for equality has also been used by others, such as Badran, who argues gender equality is integral to the Islamic feminist notion of equality of all insan or humankind, transcending tribe, class, ethnicity, and race. Dr. Shuruq, can you explain more on what you mean by the historicity of tradition and the universality of feminists?
Okay, I'll speak to the second point. I think the other point has already been covered. Just to mention that Bint al-Shati has been writing about equality as based on a complex and sophisticated notion of insan from the 1950s. So she really precedes many of the later works, including that of Fazlur Rahman, to my knowledge, and she's always ignored by the feminists themselves, which sometimes seems to me like within it echoes the idea within Western philosophy that you have to kill the father in order to produce new traditions of thought. So you kill the earlier philosophers. But in this case, she's completely ignored within feminist hermeneutics. On the second point, sorry, what was the second point? I've lost the train of my thoughts.
Can you explain more on what you mean by the
historicity and universality? So this is a point that Aisha Hidayatullah brings up in her book Feminist Edges of the Quran. That and it's also something that I have written about earlier on in 2009, but I think Aisha Hidayatullah really expanded that critique. The feminist hermeneutics sees the male mufassir, the mufassirs of the Islamic tradition and the fuqaha as having imposed their historical and cultural understandings on the Quran. They have transposed their male understanding onto the Quran, which was informed, of course, by what surrounded them. And somehow there is a possibility of stripping our understanding of the Quran in a simple way from those patriarchal historical understandings and reading the Quran on its own terms and discovering that it confirms liberal notions of equality. So there is one. So they apply critique to the tradition, but they don't apply critical. I won't use the term reflexivity because Ray told me off one time about reflexivity. and reflectivity. So, but they don't apply critical reflectivity on their own work and how it is historically conditioned. So they themselves, the epistemic paradigms of the Western liberal model pervade a lot of our thinking, pervade our language, and there isn't enough reflection on the presuppositions they bring to the Quran and the historical context in which we are now interpreting the Quran and asking of it the gender equality question. So it is that, this is what I mean. It seems that the, like the title of Asma Barlas' book, Unreading Patriarchy, it's as if just bringing back the Quran to its original meaning by unreading the patriarchy from it, as if that reading she produces is universal. I think that's problematic. And finally, I think philosophically speaking, and I'll hand over to Mahmoud, philosophically speaking, you either accept historicity for the male mufassirs of the past as well as for yourself and make something of it, as Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid did, or you accept that the Quran, there is an objective way of understanding the universal meanings of the Quran, and that the mufassirs of the past may have succeeded, and you too could build on them and continue that, even if there are disagreements or developments, etc. But if it's possible for you, then it's possible for the past. If the past is historicized, you also need to historicize yourself. That's putting it as crudely as possible. Mahmoud, you want to say more on that?
I think you have clarified it very well, but I would just say the issue of the binary of historicity versus the historical understanding of the Quran is all about where to locate the meaning of the text. So for feminists, they locate the meaning of the text on something that is not concrete, something that can anybody impose any idea on the text. So they situate or they locate the meaning of the Quran in the universal. And when we ask the feminists how to define the universal, they would say the universal is God's intent, which is not fully realized to any particular person in any particular time, which makes the text open for like making the text say something that the text itself doesn't say, and making the text say something that the text itself doesn't support. So the issue here is with definition. How can we find the universal in a very coherent methodological manner?
Yeah, but they are, just to point out that as they are trying to find the universal, they are universalizing certain epistemic assumptions about what the universal is that come from outside the Islamic tradition, that are more specific to Western paradigms of thought. That is not bad in itself.
Yeah,
honesty is important about how we position ourselves hermeneutically, philosophically, and so on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, there's just one more question. I'll let it, we'll eat into our break time now, if that's okay. But Mariam Kawar has 3 things here. Let me just read it. If not through the universal value system, then how can gender equality even be achieved when even the Akhlaq text itself reduces women to less than human by denying them any possibility of spiritual transcendence? She goes on also, in essence, women are not considered to be equal to men by the medieval scholars. How can one then disagree with them if not through a feminist approach? In essence, that's it. Yeah, so it's a double question, and this will be the last response from you. If you could make it
as short as possible. I'll try against my own nature.
Have a break.
I think was it Mariam?
Yes.
I think, Mariam, you might be referring to the work of Zahra Ayyubi, Gendered Morality, if I'm not mistaken. If that's the case, please write in the chat, and Dr. Ray will tell me. So,
Q&A.
sorry?
Into the Q&A.
Into the Q&A, sorry, into the Q&A.
Yeah.
So, I think the reading of the Akhlaq tradition by Zahra Ayyubi is very skewed by the hermeneutic of suspicion. It's a very reductive reading of the text. So I would completely urge you to read the original text, if possible, in Persian or the equivalent in Arabic. It's totally the opposite, that the Akhlaq tradition, as all Islamic disciplines, we have complex understandings of equality, but it cannot all be reduced to a misogynistic tradition. There are many examples, many gems in the tradition that offer sights of hope. And in the Akhlaq tradition, against some explicit reduction of women in the Greek tradition, on which the Akhlaq tradition is based to some extent, whereby the woman has no soul. In the Akhlaq tradition, the woman clearly has a soul. You can see that the ethicists, the Muslim ethicists, may be contradicting themselves on some issues, but they are consistently saying that women are capable of spiritual perfection. So the reading of Zahra Ayyubi in Gendered Morality, for me, comes across as an example of how you read into the tradition its own dismissal. You dismiss it by continuing to read it negatively as patriarchal, when it makes very important contribution to gender equality, although not from the horizon of our 21st century, but from the horizon of their times. There is emphasis on the possibility for women to achieve spiritual perfection. There are even other things that you read into the ethical tradition by Ghazali, Tusi, and Davani, where you see, for example, some anxiety about the power women have over men. Not just that men, women are less, no, rather women are more powerful in some respects. Yes, Al-Muhaddithat, and not just Al-Muhaddithat, the work of Asma Said. Dr. Hiba Raouf has shared the work of Al-Muhaddithat by Sheikh Muhammad Akram Nadwi, and he has produced multiple volumes. Now this is a lifetime's work. I think he documented thousands, I'm not sure of the exact number of women. And Asma Said has really studied in great depth the lives of some muhaddithat across the centuries. And there is the work of Ruth Rodod on women scholars, from Ibn Sa'd to Who's Who. There is a lot of work on the role of women in shaping the epistemic Muslim paradigm. And it is absolutely fascinating. And I always say that on many occasions, that the Muslim Usuli tradition has accepted that women can be mujtahidat like men. So there's no difference between a female and a male in producing, if they have the right conditions, if they have the right qualifications, to produce ijtihad, to engage in ijtihad. And this is not a modern opinion. This is a pre-modern opinion. And I'll stop here. Sorry, Dr. Ray.
No, not at all. Thank you very, very much. We will cut our break short by 10 minutes, but that's fine, because I do want to start on time at 15:30, according to the program, if that's okay, with Dr. Hema. So thank you so much. It was a very rich presentation and session. I'm sure we could have gone on for another hour or more.
You know me, I could go on for 3 hours.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mahmoud.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Oh, he's disappearing. Okay, thank you, Mahmoud. So now we will break for 20 minutes and return at 15:30 Doha time in 20 minutes. Thank you very much. We'll see you then. So thank you very much. Let me introduce Dr. Heba Raouf Azad, who is the Assistant Professor in Political Science at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, Turkey, where I'd love to visit very soon when I get my vaccine. Her presentation is entitled Best Interest, Common Good Utility in Political Sciences. And we welcome you and thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure actually to be here with you, and I have been very keen to attend all the sessions and listen carefully and take notes. So I've been learning along as well, and I've been inspired in my presentation as well, but by some of the questions that were raised during the previous sessions. And I, under the same title that you mentioned, I made a bit of modification for my presentation in order for me to focus, as I suggested in my comment yesterday, that the keyword is actually imagination. How can we imagine in a very complex world so many contradicting interests, so many levels of interest, and so many dimensions that I will basically address. And from a political perspective, but also from an Islamic one, I tried to sort of make a map for how to enter such a topic, bearing in mind some of the other perspectives that have been mentioned, especially Constanze yesterday when she talked about political theory. So I'm trying to take it further up to the epistemological or paradigmatic or more levels of how to imagine and how to think, how to approach topics, etc. So I called my presentation Imagining the Public and the Good. When we're talking about public good, so what is the public basically? This is one thing. We have been witnessing a sort of a corrosion of that public. We have a problem with the consistency of the notion of the ummah, the notion of humanity at large, universality, etc. And other concepts are also usually scrutinized when we talk about different topics. Who are we addressing? What public are we talking about? In which topic, etc. And also the notion of the good. What is the public good? So the notion of the good and all the ethical and religious dimension related to that as well. So I was just trying to sort of map the issues. This is just like sketching. When I was asked to talk about public good, what would a Muslim political scientist think of basically? And I think that Dr. Constanze yesterday saved me the talk about a bit about the modern political thought, etc. So the first thing that I want to start with is actually basically the post-normal times that we are living in. I love this text that I circulated. I gave it to Ray and he sent it to everyone. Welcome to the post-normal times, though I disagree with some of its assumptions, because when he starts by saying all that was normal has now evaporated, it's not really true. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but whoever knows Ziauddin Sardar would be used to his style. So we still are living with normalities, many normalities, and even after COVID, when we started talking about the new normal, I was really very uncomfortable as well, because I think that the new normal is a notion that makes you feel like you have to accept it, otherwise you are backward. You know, but actually some of the components of this new normal are extremely authoritarian and extremely not informed by public good or public debates. But we have to follow the scientists, and sometimes the scientists come after 2-3 months and say, we were mistaken. You don't have to wear gloves, you can only wear masks, and you can do this, you can do that. Oh, actually, the percentage of the vaccine is only in sometimes 66% success, etc. So these post-normal times, post-new normal times, etc. But still, what is important in the text that it focuses on some dimensions like uncertainty, complexity, and having to acknowledge some ignorance about unfolding phenomena. And this is a challenge because you are dealing with a frame that is absolute, which is the text and the revelation and the sunnah and our own understanding and our heritage, etc. Well, so many things are changing, but also within that absolute, inside, there is a recognition of change as well inside the text. So God did not send the Quran for just one generation. So the component of time is not only a frame, but it's also inside the machine of thinking itself, the Islamic thinking, etc. We need to remind ourselves with the paradigm that we are discussing. So I wanted to start by stating Tawheed. And Tawheed is not only that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one and only, but also that He is the one who created the world and He has a nomos. There is a system in that world that is functioning, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is very important, He is the Qayyum. He is the one who is actually in charge. He did not kick this universe and then sitting and He laid Himself back and is just looking at it functioning. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator, and He created the nomos. And then we have the dimension of revelation, al-hukm wal-amr. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the right judgment about things, and then He asks us to apply through the revelation, and He guides us to how to make the right judgment, etc. There is the dimension of reason, and reason is actually cannot be untangled from fitra and sunan. Fitra is the human nature as described by its good and bad sides in the Quran, but also you have the sunan, you have the social laws and how societies function. So human nature is a very complex notion in Islam. There is the dimension of hawa, nafs, etc., the different maratib al-nafs. There is so much to talk about, but these are just reminders. And then also the dimension of fate that I just added 5 minutes ago after listening to Dr. Ghali this morning and going through my presentation. And I think that fate is very important, because at some point science cannot do much, and sometimes science can do things that are not allowed, like he gave the case of the two wives of a man, and one of them cannot have children, etc. So I think that giving into fate is one of the things that are very important. It's part of the faith in Islam. And actually modernity was about not giving in to faith, to fate. Yeah, it was about, no, we will change everything, including the nomos even. So it's very important point. And then the nubuwa, because we usually refer to the Quran, to the text, to the interpretation, to the phenomenology, but nubuwa is very important because it's the humanization, the human manifestation of the practice of that text in everyday life of Prophet Muhammad, and that's why this is very important. We fully understand that the scale and time and conditions are changing, but there is a core. Otherwise, nubuwa wouldn't have meant anything. It would have been something related to history of that time. But it is actually going beyond that time, because it's giving us the essential way of dealing with the issues and the essential pillars of any society, no matter how time changes. And then we have the notion of ethics, and it was raised in many presentations, the dimension of civility, trust, but also altruism. And I think this is very important, because in many situations, the different interests actually need to be negotiated, but also there is a dimension of concession, giving into some bigger interests in some conditions and in some circumstances, and the dimension of altruism and how actually people have a moral code where actually you might know that you have a right, but then you are willing to negotiate that right for wider social consensus, showing solidarity, whatever. And I think this is a very important dimension that is usually neglected. And ethics is not only morality, because there is a very good text by Zygmunt Bauman, a very well-known sociologist, Morality Without Ethics, where he described that modernity is actually providing some moral dimensions as well, but this morality is actually without ethics. There isn't an essential core of it, while in Islam there is a dimension of this tazkiyah that has some core in it. And then what is also very important is the day of judgment, because in specific circumstances, whether it's a group or individual interest, you might actually, as I just mentioned, practice altruism, because you are looking for a better reward by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even barakah in this world, a blessing by Allah for the attitudes that you are showing to others, etc. And this can be on different levels, including group level or individual level or collective levels as well. What is the mizan when someone is considering the notion of maslaha, when it comes, for example, from a public policy perspective or local politics perspective? Councils in the UK, as an example, baladiyas in Istanbul, you know, the local politics, when people negotiate different interests on the local level, let alone the big national or even universal level. One of the dimensions when it comes to Islamic perspective is this world and the hereafter. And you'll find a lot written by Al-Farabi, by Al-Ghazali, and all these great thinkers relating the worldly maslaha with the maslaha on the Day of Judgment, worldly happiness. Al-Farabi described the most important goal of politics is basically تحصيل السعادة, to achieve happiness, to attain happiness, but not only in this world, but also in the hereafter. And this reminds us of Bentham when Constance yesterday mentioned pleasure and pain. Actually, these pleasures are seen not only in the collective, but also on the horizontal, but also on the vertical level in terms of time and this world and the hereafter. The scale is very important. What type of interests are we talking about? Are we talking about individual interest? And the individual does not stand vis-a-vis the collective. There is intermediate group dimension, and you'll find a lot of this written in multiculturalism and multicultural citizenship writings in political and social sciences. When there is that group dimension, the aboriginals, the different social groups, linguistic groups, etc. And then the global. So it's not only the collective can be under the boundaries, under the ceiling of the national, but can also be collective global when it comes to environmental issues, etc. And then the human and other species. And then we will talk about that at the end, because it's not only about balancing human maslahas, human interests, but also sometimes other species, to which extent you want to expand habitat or expand the city, for example, while this will affect basically will affect the natural ecosystem or biological system around you. In the case of Bahrain, in the Gulf, for example, they wanted to expand the space of the kingdom, and then they expanded it in the sea, and of the species under the water were very much affected by that. So, to which extent and what is the need of it? Is it just for the sake of expanding the space, or is it for a specific other capitalist reason, military reason, and how can we balance all these? And then the degree, what type in the Sharia, I found out when I was reading that there are so many levels of interests and loss of interest. So the harm that would be actually inflicted, what type of harm in order to balance it vis-a-vis the benefit. So in the Quran, and I got these notions from the Quran, we have the level of haraj, which is embarrassment, that someone is not at ease in doing something. So the maslaha is actually to relieve him and to not put him in that sense of embarrassment. And then we have anat, which is a hardship. And then we have harm, direct harm that would be caused for a person, and hence the interest of that person and group or a wider group should be taken into consideration, or fasad, which is corruption. So there are so many levels that we are basically balancing. And then comes also along is the nature of the harm. Is the nature of the harm bodily, or is it material, related to economy, or direct material sort of interest that will be affected, or more moral, psychological, because this is also is taken into consideration when it comes to a sense of dignity, a sense of loss, a sense of a moral compensation, a sense of esteem. All that comes into the calculation, not only of a faqih, of a scholar, but also when it comes to politics and when it comes to public policies as well. As I say, the more it gets to local politics, the more these dimensions of the psychological, the sense of harmony in the community, the solidarity, the level of trust. And now we have tools to basically test all these levels in different societies. Is the harm or the interest clear or ambiguous? And this was mentioned by Dr. Mu'taz when he mentioned al-masalih al-mu'tabara, masalih al-mursala, etc. And then the time dimension. Is it a long-term or a short-term or a medium-term interest or harm? Maybe we can tolerate a harm that is short-term, but on long-term there is more interest and more benefit for the community or for the specific group or for the person himself, etc. And then the reasoning itself. How can we imagine when we are talking about public interest, the way we are reasoning and argumenting for public interest, like was focused on by Dr. Sari Hanafi yesterday. So who is doing the reasoning? Is it the public at large? Is it like a public debate? Or is it the scholars? And then we give into the scholars because we trust them, or we can argue, but at the end of the day, they hold the keys of understanding, etc., of specific technical points in Islamic law, or the scholars in law, for example, even if it's positive law? Or is it the rule of experts? And again, COVID brought this to the table, because the doctors started talking and everyone was silenced. Even presidents were standing behind doctors when they were making statements, etc. And then this changed because doctors, after 6 months, discovered something else and started changing the way they are approaching some of the procedures that affected very much politically our freedom of movement, for example. Who is reasoning as well? Is it an individual or a group, or the representatives of them? Because we have different level of reasoning and negotiation when it comes to a group and individual negotiation or reasoning together, or is it through representatives? Because this will have an impact on to which degree can people come back later in time and say, but our representatives did not really mirror what we believed in, or we have to change this dynamic of negotiation of the public good, for example. And then the argumentation and the language, as was mentioned yesterday by Dr. Sari, again, this debate in social sciences today about the secular language in public argumentation. So even if you want to come from a religious background, you have to, your language and discourse has to be secular. You don't have to refer to God said, Prophet Muhammad said. Make the argument in a rational way and highlight the maslaha, highlight the interest, and try to come into the argumentation without previous notions. And actually, this is something debatable, because why should I accept the secular umbrella, and why not the secular can actually take its own seats? And we also put on the table some of our argumentation without muting our sources of knowledge and our understanding. And this is a very complex issue, let alone the language. It's not only about the argument, it's about the language. And again, when we are talking about multicultural rights, sometimes people who are representatives, like the previous point in reasoning, are speaking a language that is not the Aboriginal language, and they are not necessarily expressing what the language contains of meaning, for example. So this is another dimension. Added to this is the secularization of the process itself, because it takes place in institutions and organizations in the modern nation state, while actually it took different conditions and different spatial contexts in other societies. And still till today, we have in many African countries, Asian countries, the importance of the tribe. So maybe we can consider the horizontal and the vertical again when we are thinking about the reasoning and the process itself and the details, because as we say in Arabic, the Satan is in the details, or the devil is in the details. So details matter a lot. And then the medium. Do people actually have a public debate or a public negotiation or reasoning or exchange or argumentation face-to-face? And we did some research when we had a big project I was part of on global democracy. And some experiences came from the Pacific, some islands from the Pacific, but actually time and direct contact in negotiation was actually essential for this community to reach an understanding of the public good. So the institutionalization is not always useful. Sometimes it harms this sense of trust when it takes the negotiation and the public reasoning into spaces of institutions, not in the spaces of where people actually live and their natural habitat, where the level of trust is actually very high. The common. What is the common in liquid modernity and late capitalism? Of course, we can anticipate a lot of challenge for this notion of the common, because even common sense is not that common anymore. Coming out from small communities to a wider scale across centuries, the common sense has been affected by the level of education, the different logics of religions, have a multi-religious community, class. In different classes, what is common sense for some people is not common in the minds of others. So the common sense of everyday life, I mean, that actually leads to social negotiation regarding maslaha and interest. And then culture, we might have in the very same Islamic Ummah, different cultures that for them the common sense is actually not the common sense in terms of logic, the common sense in terms of everyday life, upon which their argumentation for their understanding of maslaha would be actually built. And then common interest. How can we build this common interest in times of competition, individualism, old and new, because we don't say that individualism is a problem only of modernity. I mean, it's about the individual across time, the human nature that seeks its own interest in a way. Not 90% of people are not altruistic, and at the end of the day, the individual considerations comes usually first. So here we discuss human nature, we discuss socio-political orders, and we take into account all these differences. Who speaks in the name of the commons? Does it do people speak the people who speak in the name of the commons, are they the scholars? And we witnessed that in our Islamic history. And when Dr. Abdullah Ghali mentioned the book of Maṣlaḥa al-Anam, actually Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam was a very prominent scholar who came from Syria to Egypt, and who was defending the people's rights against the taxation, the heavy taxation that was imposed on them by the Mamluks, for example. So he was speaking in the name of the commons. People went to the scholars to represent them, and scholars took that responsibility. Or are those who are speaking in the name of the commons the experts? Or is it the state in national, ultra-national and radical nationalist discourses and populism? Those who speak in the name of the commons is the state from a position of authority, speaking in the name of the nation and the public interest, but also the national interest that comes first before anything else in many times. Thick and thin, sometimes when we are portraying the differences in understanding and reasoning public good and public interest, we think of politics as a debate of a space of deliberation, which is not true, because we have so many theories in political science about agonistic politics. You know, politics is a space of contestation, and hence order and disorder are very important topics, you know. And there is a tendency somehow in the Islamic scholarship generally to prioritize order. And even when we study Al-Ghazali, Al-Mawardi, such Islamic scholars, early Islamic classic, and their early Islamic classic writings, there is that sense of trying to preserve the order, because without that order, Sharia will not be applied, and the ultimate goals to protect human interests will not be achieved, etc. But actually, some disorder is also very important in understanding the maslahas, because if there is an overarching rule of a specific elite, then the masses sometimes have to move, and the consideration of disorder in defining maslaha or restoring the wider maslaha of a nation is very important. And this point is very important to remember, because we are now celebrating or commemorating the Arab Spring after 10 years. And I think the notion of disorder has been tarnished a lot. And there is a very good book actually that was written by Mohammed Bamia, who is a Palestinian, originally Palestinian social scientist, which has the title "Anarchy as Order." And I think it's a very interesting book. And then the state of exception. At times when the state, the modern national state, the regional, the territorial state, takes in hand the state of exception, which is the situation when the state decides that there is a threat, and we have to go to laws of emergency, and then people have no say, and this can extend for many years, by the way, in many third world countries. So the state of exception mutes any argumentation and reasoning about public interest, and then things are usually top down, not bottom up, and the definition of the public common good is basically muted in a way. And then, of course, comes with that the civil-military dilemma. Who is deciding if we have military regimes? And this is very common in our Muslim world. It's not about seeking the common good from an argumentative perspective, and then hence the Islamist secular. No, it's actually the civil-military. The civil, with all its layers, is facing a military logic of basically imposing a specific logic of the common good, of the public interest, and of the how to define the whole scene. And the good, again, how can we look at the good and map it? So this was the public, what about the good? This was the common, what about the good? The nomos order is one of the things that we keep in mind when we are looking at the maslaha. and the order of the universe, the order of the world, the nomos of the earth, as we call it, but not from a Western perspective, but from an Islamic perspective, because this is also the nomos of the earth is one basic notion in the Quran that is very important. And you'll always find the word earth, al-ard, related to fasad or islah. And then we have the public good and the public goods. There is the economic dimension of capitalism that is very important, because the public good is very much related to a system of welfare, not a system of warfare, and not a system of a morality without ethics. And the privatization programs that took place actually excluded a lot of people from the notion of a public good, and this privatization, exclusivity, modern global economy paradigm is actually one of the challenges facing the notion of maslaha from an Islamic perspective today. The public and the publics, we have different publics actually today, and we have to take into consideration not only the impact of late capitalism when it comes to the dominant economic logic of calculating maslaha in different situations and issues, but also meaning commodification, consumerism, reification, etc. But also we have to take into consideration the dimension of morality without ethics, as I mentioned, and the rise of philosophies that actually do not believe that there is only one consistent homogeneous public. There are understandings of post-truth pluralism, and a politics of recognition is entailed in that as well. And somehow you can feel in some societies that there is a loss of compass, and there is such a struggle over power. So the notion of the good is not a sort of a floating notion, but it also has a lot to do with power dynamics in different societies. What are the dimensions that should be taken into consideration? Back to some of the things that have been, some of the points that have been raised yesterday, especially the point of architecture and space and cities, etc., which I'm interested in. I teach political theory, but also urban politics and urban sociology. So the first dimension is the mentality, not only the fragmented mind in our societies today between secularism and Islamism, trying to seek and to define and to reason and to argue about public interest and public good, but also between different social sciences. And here, of course, economy was taking over since the 60s, that public interest in many cases actually were basically taking the economic benefit as a measure, while different disciplines were not allowed. Sociology was neglected, anthropology, political science, even on the long term, not in terms of political science affected by economic calculations like rational choice theories that consider the voter to be like the consumer. You know, economy took over the imagination of social sciences, but now we are trying to liberate ourselves a bit. There was the linguistic turn, there was the spatial turn, and there is more complexity now in different social sciences when it comes to how to think about the public and the common and the interest. And then spatiality, the space, the urban, global, rural, tribal junctures. And the example of the corrosion of urf, for example. For a long time, maslaha was taking urf, was taking norms into consideration. So what is the normal? What is the abnormal when it comes to normality and norms? And then what is beyond the normal? What is the instantaneous? What is the exceptional? And of course, we have this notion of mobility and neo-nomadism with immigration, dislocation, globalization. So when you are restructuring societies all the time, what type of public are you having? And hence, how can you define the public good if so many stakeholders come into the situation, especially with the global cities, you know, where you have people coming from all different backgrounds, and the argumentation and reasoning process becomes extremely complex. And not all of them are represented in the system. This is another point. And then the temporalities. Are we thinking about interest in terms of the everyday, or in terms of history, time, and future? And this was mentioned before, or times of war, which are times of exception. So what I said before can also come under this complex understanding and mapping of notions of temporality and time. And then the technicality, and here comes a very new chapter, which is the artificial intelligence. And sometimes now we are faced by some suggestions that artificial intelligence even would be used in fatwas. There was a suggestion that I read about that the fatwa body in Egypt, the establishment was thinking about compiling all the fatwas that it offered to people over such a long time, and then putting them in databases and using artificial intelligence basically to so that you can call and then you say the fatwa and you have this electronic answer, and then they give you the fatwa online from the database through artificial intelligence. And they were saying, wow, this would be great, we'll save a lot of time. And for me, this is complete nonsense, because there are so many things that actually come into that, including tazkiyah, including the moral, ethical dimension of, would you be able to do that? Should you be doing that? Is it the best interest for everyone to do that? How you calculate, etc. And these ideas need negotiation between people of the interest that is being discussed, and the scholars and the wider community as well. You can't do it over like electronic and artificial intelligence tools. And then we are entering into times of post-humanism and post-anthropocentrism, which means also that with the rise of robots, how far the interests of the machine, the human, nature, and other creatures as well can all be calculated in some situations that are extremely complex. For example, so the technical, the techne, the culture that comes with it, and the tools that can facilitate or sometimes look as if they are facilitating, but they are actually making this very difficult to comprehend. From an Islamic perspective, it's a sensitive issue as well. And last but not least, choice and piety. When Dr. Ghali was talking about different options with people in the bioethical dimension and topics related to reproduction, related to organs issues and transplantation, related to all these dimensions. I think that sometimes we think as if it's a big public debate. No, sometimes actually Maṣlaḥa is a personal choice. What would you choose as a human being when it comes to your yes or no regarding an issue, with all that in the background? And I think that sometimes people want to take the responsibility of taking decisions when it comes to some boils down to your own decision or a small group decision, and they want to put it, as we say in Egypt, in the neck of a scholar. You know, so just go a scholar, take a fatwa, and then he would be the one responsible in front of Allah, and you go clear and clean, which is not the case. Sometimes you have to consider piety in times of choices and take the responsibility of taking your own decisions with all what it entails as well. And back to complexity, I think that we need to, again, as I mentioned earlier, cross the borders of disciplines. The scholars of Islam cannot, or jurisprudence, Islamic fiqh, cannot do, as Dr. Abdullah Ghali mentioned, without consulting sociologists, doctors, urban planners, economists, you name it. So there is a need to create these platforms, and they are not many, by the way. Rarely are we invited in the Muslim world to discuss things of Islamic nature with scholars when it comes to things related to public policy and public interest, especially if the scholars are on a platform that is completely manipulated by the state, like the Darul Ifta in Egypt, or other such organization or institutions or platforms. And how to reclaim the common, whatever is common between people, and rebuild it. Social movements come into here as well. It's not only about the structures, it's also about social movements and how the interests of the commons should be basically reflected in the public sphere and the public space as well. The Arab Spring in mind again. And then reforming the way we read, reforming Iqra, which was the first word revealed in the Quran, how to read our society, how to read our texts, how to read our conditions, how to read the world, how to read the universe. And I think this is bringing us back to the wider picture and wider framing. And I stop here.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Hema. Could you leave your PowerPoint up in case people want to refer to it? I do. Is it too late? we don't have any questions yet. So, but I think that was a wonderful presentation to end the school with, in terms of providing a kind of blueprint ideas of how to proceed in relation to the public and the good and Maṣlaḥa. That first quote that you brought up, I might be the second slide. What struck me was the opening phrase, "All that was normal has now evaporated."
Yeah, I challenged that.
Well, no, it's just that it reminded me of the Marx's Karl Marx's statement, "All that is solid melts into air," which comes from the Communist Manifesto, right?
Yeah,
I think it was taken from there and reworked. Yeah. So, sorry, I just got a message. Just a
minute. I think Dr. Shuru wants to ask a question.
Yes, she does. So please go ahead, but please use the question and the Q&A function rather than the chat, because I can't look at both. So please, Dr. Shuru, feel free.
May I speak? I haven't written a question.
Yes.
Yes,
please do.
Thank you.
Assalamu
alaikum, Dr. Hiba. Lovely to see you here. I have very inspiring, and it really provides the broader context for thinking about the specific topics that we've been looking at over the past 2 days. So this is a nice summation for thinking in the broader terms. You're always theoretically apt in that way, tying things together. So I was prompted by your reference to spatiality. When I was looking at manuscripts in Istanbul last year, and we had a conversation about that, one of the manuscripts was a waqfiyya of Hurrem Sultan, wife of Sultan Sulaiman al-Qanuni, written up by Shaykh al-Islam Abu Saud. And she was endowing a mosque, and the endowment of the mosque was very detailed, but one aspect of it was to appoint a Quran reciter with a beautiful voice. So the job description was quite detailed, but the key points was that he should have a beautiful voice, he should have mastered the arts of recitation, and he should be able to, or has the capacity to, move the people who are in attendance of the mosque or who are outside the mosque. And that struck me really as Muslim, the ethics of endowment here are considering a certain artistic ethics that is missing completely the beauty, exactly. And I tried to emphasize in my presentation how the beauty of the Quran is not just form, it is configurative, it's constitutive of the meaning. But that is in some examples of Muslim civilization has been translated into the soundscape, into the landscape, into spatially, so to speak. So I wondered whether you want to say something about beauty and the art, and just thinking about the Enlightenment and all the political thought that comes in the 18th century, really that is preceded by an artistic renaissance, which allowed for a humanistic articulation of an imagined classics. So the classics were not the classics, they were an imagined classics brought into, revived, because Renaissance means partly to revive, revived in order to recreate space, art, material culture, other aspects of culture. So so my question to you, we talk a lot about rationalizing the public, and Maṣlaḥa is understood as rational negotiation of considerations. What about the artistic side of the artistic Maṣlaḥa, so to speak? Sorry.
Yes, it's a great point, actually. I can even add it. You reminded me of Dr. Khalid Abul Fadl. He has a very nice book about this neglected dimension of beauty. and it's usually seen as tahsiniyat. You know, it's like the third level of interest that is not daruri or haji. You know, it's like it's when we have the luxury of adding beauty, then we try to add beauty, which is not true at all. And when I teach urban sociology, I always mention that in the caves there were paintings of the early ages of humanity, and they even added colors. And I used to say, this is fascinating. It's like if they make drawings, okay, this reflects the importance of, you know, expressing themselves and leaving something behind. But caring to add the colors, where you have a dinosaur outside the cave waiting for you to be eaten, you know, it's like with all the complexity and difficulties that they were facing in these early ages of humanity, and still they were very careful to, you know, add this touch of beauty. It means that beauty is a fitra. It's not something that is added with civilization. And when we teach about architecture in the modern times, there is a functional dimension of looking at architecture and space, the landscaping, etc. But there is an essential dimension of beauty that you can find in the Islamic civilization and many other civilizations, by the way, that they consider to be essential. And I think that this should be taken into consideration, you know, definitely. And as far as the government can do so, why are they building all these ugly buildings around us? While they can actually add a touch of beauty. And if you have a proper urban design mufti who understands the dimensions of the space and the building and how it affects basically thinking, they would issue fatwas against ugly buildings in the city. But they are not into that. Thank you for raising the issue. Definitely, yeah.
Thank you very much.
And also the beauty of action, you know, how you do, which is al-fadl. You know, there is a degree of beauty, not aesthetic in terms of visual, but moral. You know, how you do things elegantly. You know, how you do them beautifully. You know, how to be kind beautifully, how to be gracious, and these dimensions are very important. They are not unnecessary things or tahsiniyat. They are in the heart of how to behave as a person and how to consider beauty to be actually also one of the maqasid, because it's there in the cosmos, in the nomos, everywhere.
Yes, exactly. And thank you so much for that point. And if I may just add in echoing what you said, in secondment of what you said, that the beautiful, especially in relation to the sound of the Quran, is understood as not as tahsiniyat, is actually the motivation for ethical action, because as we're spiritually moved, even Sheikh Muhammad Abdu says so in the introduction to Tafsir al-Manar. As we are spiritually moved by the material phenomenon of the sound and language of the Quran, we are trying to improve ourselves ethically in our practice. But that's the primary motivation, rather than an additional element of enjoying the sound of the Quran after considering it ethically. Rather, it precedes and predicates the ethical action. Thank you.
The sonic sphere, in Islamic architecture, there is even one of the classes I taught was talking about the sound of water, the fountains and the sound of water that relates you to nature. But vis-a-vis the sonic wars that we have in the city related to policing, that this sound that the police makes to intimidate people and make a statement, we are here, don't you dare think about demonstrating in Cairo today, it's part and parcel, and it is getting higher around January every year. Yeah, and my mom's place overlooks Tahrir Square. So she has been telling me in a phone call, she's saying these days, because of January, and they wanted to send a message that the police is everywhere, it's awful. 24 hours, the sound of the police sirene of the cars, so it's also the opposite, how actually the sound can be actually very authoritarian and manipulative in the civil military relations in the public sphere.
Yes, and they have completely reconstructed Tahrir Square for security.
Yeah, visually as well. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. That was a really very, very nice discussion. We do have a question. which I think relates to the idea of the exceptionalism that you talked about. And by the way, I should add that not all emergency powers are in the third world. I mean, the United States since 9/11 has been implementing exceptionalist powers to control. Now, the question here is from Yusuf Salhan. What is a framework or guidelines that you suggest does not allow governments to exploit and misuse maslaha?
The presence of social movements that I mentioned at the end of my talk. That
no, you're sorry.
Presence of people.
Sorry, we're not hearing you properly. The connection is being distorted. Perhaps if you speak slowly, yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. When we are talking about the framework,
Yes, I can repeat the question, of course. What is your framework or provide guidelines that can show activism? Right. Yes. Well, obviously. Okay. So another question. Do you want to elaborate on that? I'm sorry, you're cutting out now. I don't know what's going on. Whether that might be me. I don't know.
We can all see it. She has a connection issue.
Oh, so you can still see and hear me?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just have to wait until Dr. Heba can return. Meanwhile, the next question, and others may want to come in. The next question is, the Muslim world is facing the dilemma between dictatorship, monarchy, and democracy. Scholars get legitimacy for both. So how will Maṣlaḥa guide us to resolve this dichotomy? This is the question that comes from Mushtaq Al-Haq Ahmed Sikandar. Oh, we really seem to have lost her. Dr. Mu'taz, could I call on you?
Sorry?
Could I call on you to address this, what I think is a really interesting question?
Sorry, I didn't hear, I didn't get the question.
No problem, I'll repeat it. The Muslim world is facing the dilemma between dictatorship, monarchy, and democracy. Scholars get legitimacy for both. So how will Maṣlaḥa guide us to resolve this dichotomy?
This is a complicated question, and it cannot be addressed in a short answer. I think the best way is to institutionalize Maṣlaḥa in a way or another. So the key problem here, whether it's in the classical period or in the contemporary period, in the state period, that we don't have Maṣlaḥa was not institutionalized, so it remained an individual assessment, or a group assessment at least. And this is one of the key problems that we face when we talk about Maṣlaḥa, especially when we talk about the political sphere or the political field. So I think this is what we miss, the procedural. So we in the Islamic tradition, we have a very rich tradition related to the theoretical part of Maṣlaḥa and values, and how to and the hierarchy of these values, and how to balance between them. But what we miss is the procedural, how we implement these. And we still miss this in our contemporary, in the contemporary Islamic thought. Yeah. And this is the key or the most valuable part of Rawls, actually, in his theory on justice. So because he focused mainly on the procedural issue, and this is what we miss, actually.
Thank you. We don't seem to have Dr. Heba back.
I'm sorry,
yet.
I was disconnected.
Oh, you're back. Wonderful.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
That's all right. We were filling in for you, but now that you're here, I'm very happy to repeat the last question. Dr. Martaz gracefully responded to it. This is from where are we? I'm sorry, I've just lost it. Here we are. The Muslim world is facing the dilemma between dictatorship, monarchy, and democracy. Scholars get legitimacy for both. So how will Maṣlaḥa guide us to resolve this dichotomy?
It does not stand alone as a theory. There are social relations, power dynamics, struggles, etc. So it guides you to the ultimate maslaha. And what the regimes are doing is basically hijack the religious discourse to highlight order as a maslaha, while under that order, basically people's lives are threatened, people's highest interests are threatened, even the political independence of a country is threatened. So, and I think this, Dr. Mu'taz can talk more about that, when the maslaha is hijacked by the regimes, to the extent that sometimes Islamic movements even feel reluctant to challenge the regimes in front of direct maslahas that are very clear, like the trend or the sweeping trend of normalization with Israel today in the Arab world. And Dr. Mu'taz wrote about that. How can you calculate the maslahas to defend the ummah, while actually the regimes are trying to convince you that the maslaha is just to respect order and to protect the ruling regimes. So the notion of maslaha here is part and parcel of urban activism, political activism, struggles of people, the maslahas of freedom, where actually the protection of deen and the protection of nafs is highest. The nafs is not just to keep people alive like animals. It's about keeping them alive with dignity and with all the entitlements granted to them as humans and by Sharia as well.
Could you elaborate more on social movements?
Yeah, I was talking about that before I was disconnected. I think that maslaha is not only a debate in the media or in the public sphere. It's not between NGOs and the government. It's not only a matter of a scholar jumping in and saying a word and then leaving the debate. It's about having social movements that are mobilizing on the ground and basically accumulating and struggles and representing different interests of the masses. The class dimension is usually overlooked. We talk about Muslims, but even Muslims have so many different backgrounds, and they are divided. There are so many social cleavages, socioeconomic cleavages, etc. So taking that into consideration, sometimes you feel like the talk about maslaha is like a flat talk. You know, it's just a theory. No, it's not a theory. It can be very dynamic as well in guiding our socioeconomic struggles, and I think that raising the maslaha of the dignity of people and of the Ummah having a say. There is a very nice book that was published recently, maybe a year ago. Two books basically that I recommend here. One is again Muhammad Bamia, who wrote about anarchy. He has a nice book called Life Worlds of Islam, where he describes Islam as social movement, as a public philosophy, and as a global order. And it's a very nice book. And a book also by Marshall, a book titled The Caliphate of Man. Andrew Marsh wrote this book, and I think it's a very good book. He talks about the sovereignty of the Ummah, not the sovereignty of the state, but the sovereignty of the Ummah, and how it was introduced in the last 100 years by different scholars. And the manifestation, the ultimate manifestation, was basically the Arab Spring again, how people can actually feel that they have the right to protect not only themselves as individuals, but whatever values and the high ethics and morals they stand for as well on the ground, to restore the original order from authoritarianism and to take it again back to the everyday life and to the political and socioeconomic relations. So this is my answer.
Thank you very much. We have one more before we finish. So this is from Abayomi Sharomi, who says, with reference to the question concerning the Muslim world, I argue that there is always a misconception between Arab world and Muslim world.
Definitely.
That Islam evolved from an Arab land does not mean that it is an Arab religion like Hinduism is to India. Continuation, what Arab societies are facing in governance is not peculiar to them. It's not peculiar to them, hence should not be taken as Muslim world, rather Arab societies.
Yes, I fully agree. When we give examples of the Arab Spring and other situations today of normalization with Israel, etc., it's just an example. But of course, you can come in with all examples possible from the Philippines, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from minorities of Muslims as citizens in the West, and this is also a whole diverse issue that comes under what I described regarding the specialities of considering maslaha, and was mentioned by Dr. Abdullah Ghali and others when it comes to Muslims in Western countries where you have a system, where you have a different legal system, and you want to introduce your own interest as a group, whether under the title of culture or whether under the title of even faith. So I definitely agree with you that it's not enough. I even tried my best in a book that I edited to introduce some voices from outside the Arab world that are very important in the debate regarding many issues in Islam that we usually in the Arab world do not include, including South Africa, you name it, South Africa, Indian. There is such a heritage in India, Muslim heritage as well, in terms of scholarship and in terms of modern thinking. So yeah, I agree fully.
Okay, thank you very much.
Shia Sunni as well. You know, sometimes we think of in terms of the majority of Sunnis, Shia thinking should be also included.
Yes. Well, actually, I was going to ask you at one point, when you use the generic term social movements, are you really envisaging a particular social movement with a particular political agenda, or
no? Because there is a fusion of movements that is needed for representing the maslaha of the people. So we are talking sometimes about old social movements, new social movements, non-movements, and the spontaneity of going to the street and making a difference, which was the example that I gave.
Right. Thank you so much. So it's now incumbent on me. Thank you so much, Dr. Heba. It was a really interesting discussion presentation. Now we will move to conclude the winter school. But just before we do that, I would like to just impress upon all the attendees in the school you've all been sent an assessment form. Could you please fill it in and send it back to us? That's all we really ask of you. And we would really appreciate if you could all do that, because getting feedback is really important for future schools, winter schools and summer schools, to improve each time we produce one of these programs. So please just do that. Do us a favor and do the evaluation form and send it back to us as soon as possible. Thank you very much. And now I'll draw on Dr. Muhammad Ali to please make some remarks in conclusion.
Thank you, Dr. Ray, and thanks for your hard work and diligence throughout the winter school. I'm sure you are quite tired after all this. Due thanks to all the colleagues who contributed with their thoughts and insights, the students with their questions and critical remarks, our colleagues at CILE with their hard work behind the screen and in front of the screen also. I just would like to ask Dr. Amr Riyad to join us also in that. Dr. Amr Riyad is the representative of Leuven University who collaborated with us on this winter school, and this is not the first collaboration. Previous winter school, we also had it together. The previous international conference, we collaborated together in this. So unfortunately, we missed him in the beginning of the winter school. He should have been with us also to say a word. So it's not too late. So I'm happy that he's here with us, and the floor is yours, Dr. Riyad.
Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Ali. Thank you all for the efforts you have made. Actually, we are very, very honored that we could cooperate. We have cooperated in the past and now are cooperating in the future as well. And I think we should materialize this also in more and more activities. What I liked actually about the last 2 days, I have learned a lot about the conceptual framework. I made a joke with my colleague, Dr. Mu'taz, لست من الأصوليين أحب الأصوليين ولست منهم. Then I asked him actually before my presentation, please, as a historian, I need you besides me, because it's for me, this is what I learned actually in the last days, this conceptual, framework to put things together. Really thank you for that, for also the inspiring discussions with Dr. Heba and other colleagues, and her remark about the space and how we could put the Maṣlaḥa in its historical development also in the framework of the space and time. Actually, I'm also very happy that it's our collaboration is not only on the side of organizing such activities, but it will go further than that, as we have signed a memorandum of understanding, and now we are fine-tuning and in the last stage of signing an exchange and mobility agreement between student and staff. And I'm very, very happy that our students could come to CILE at least for 1 semester to study, our master students. And I see that some of our students, 2 of Leuven students, are present in the program. I'm happy about that. And hopefully that from next year on, that our students would have the honor to join CILE for 1 semester in Islamic ethics. Thank you so much, and I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Dr. Riyad, and looking forward to further collaboration, inshallah. What we have had throughout these days, taking the concept of Maṣlaḥa and trying to examine its moral dimensions in different disciplines and different fields inside and outside the Islamic tradition. This is a kind of orientation in philosophy, respecting the spirit of our work within the research center of Islamic legislation and ethics, but also this is how we teach also our students in the MA program in applied Islamic ethics. So this is also a good opportunity to give the colleagues and participants who are with us an idea about the program. And our program coordinator is Dr. Mu'taz Al-Khatib. So I give him the word to give some overall thoughts and overview of this new program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghali. Ms. Mona, okay, I can share now. Thank you very much, Ms. Mona. Okay, so this is the structure of our program, as you can see. So it's called Applied Islamic Ethics. This is the latest version of the structure. So students are asked to start with 2 foundation courses at the very beginning in their study. So these are mandatory for all students. They start with a course on Islamic ethics, mapping the field. It's like an introduction to the field of Islamic ethics as we consider it in this program. And then the second foundational course is research methods and sources on ethics. So this course enables students to focus and to be trained how to do research in the field of Islamic ethics, or in ethics in general, and specifically in the field of Islamic ethics. And this will lead them to have to finalize their thesis proposal, and then to be able to write on what they like to work on, whether it's theoretical ethics or applied ethics. They have the full freedom to choose their topics. And then after the 2 foundation courses, we will have two courses on theoretical ethics. These are scriptural ethics, ethics in the Quran and Hadith, and the theological and philosophical ethics. And then after that, they can choose 5 courses from applied courses. The list of applied courses is a wide range, they can choose Islamic bioethics, ethics of migration and human rights, moral reasoning and casuistry ethics, peace, war, and political ethics, gender and Islamic ethics, Islamic ethics of pandemics, Islamic ethics and artificial intelligence. We plan to offer this course next semester, inshallah. And we have other courses that we are developing, and they have been not offered yet. So, and we hope that we will offer them in the very near future, inshallah. And then lastly, students will dedicate 1 semester to finalize their thesis and to defend it. So the total of courses is 9 courses, 2 foundational, 2 theoretical, and 5 applied courses, and then plus thesis. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Mu'taz. It's just the way we handle it in this winter school, and as we did before with other schools, it's just a sample of how we work inside the class and addressing things from different angles. Because we believe that in CILE and in our program, in the research center and its educational arm, the MA program, is that ethics is par excellence an interdisciplinary field, where you have to deal with more than 1 disciplines in order to do justice to complex concepts and topics, like, for instance, Maṣlaḥa, maqasid, and how they would relate to ethics. And this necessitates collaboration with people from different backgrounds and from different research interests and expertise, as we have done also in this school. Finally, I would like to add that we offer scholarships for our students, whether they are international students or they are students living here in Qatar. And our students, they get opportunity to engage with the different activities that we organize, like this one, like the international conference. We also have a number of closed events which are accessible only to the participants and a limited number of people, including our students, like research seminars and the internal seminars that we do. So it's usually a very enriching experience for the students to grow when it comes to research, academic research and future career in this promising field. So this is what I wanted to say, besides thanking everybody. I also would like to thank in person all the speakers who did great job throughout this. I don't want to go name by name, but you have them all and you have known them much better during this summer schools. My due thanks to them all, to the colleagues in CILE, particularly to Dr. Ray for his hard work during this time. I think he deserves some rest after all this hard work. I don't know if we will give him the chance, but we will see. So, Dr. Ray, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. That's a nice way to end up. And people have asked about whether we can provide a certificate of attendance. We can do that, but only on request. So if any of the attendees would like a certificate, please send us an email. You have my email address or the Winter School email address, and we will try and provide you with a certificate. But please try and do it within the next few days. Don't leave it late. Just an email saying, could you please provide me with a certificate, and be clear about your name and where to send it. It'll be done online, obviously. Okay. So thank you very much to all the speakers.
There is a question about how can one apply for the scholarship in the program. The whole system of submission goes through the university, HBKU University, Hamad bin Khalifa University. If you go to the website of our university, or even if you Google AIM-A Applied Islamic Ethics, you don't have other programs with this name. You just Google it, and then you will find the way how to submit. And within a couple of days, we will also add some information on our website, CILE website, on all these procedures. So, but through the website of the university, or just Googling the name of the program, you will be easily able to find how to navigate this. Thank you.
Right. Okay, thank you very much to everybody. We wish you all the best for the future and have a very pleasant evening. Thank you. Goodbye.